Okay, did you put the verses on VC1 chat?
No, not yet.
Okay, so
By the
you
way,
just
Peter, the suggestion, they said they don't want to do stage for VC4. I thought, okay, maybe we could replace VC4 with stage, but they don't want to. Anyway, we'll talk about that later, though.
Yeah, we can talk about it later. I don't think. I mean, we don't. It's not to get rid of VC.
Yeah.
peace.
Peace.
Yeah,
everybody.
I've had some feedbacks with other people though, because the idea is good, but they say that
Yeah,
VC4
let's
is
talk
not
about that later.
that
Yeah,
busy in order
yeah,
to use that facility.
yeah. Let's talk about that after our. If you guys can just share the link with people in DM, I try to DM a lot of people and just give the event link. It's really helpful. I just tagged everybody to join the Quran study.
Why don't you just put everyone? Then
I already
everybody
did.
will get
I
it.
already did.
Yeah, I see the Turkish community tag everyone.
Yeah, but they
It
use it way
doesn't
too
annoy
much.
me though.
They tag everyone like 3 times a day. That's way
Yeah,
too
but you
much.
can do it once a
No,
week,
no.
everyone, for your
I just
Quran
did.
study.
I just did.
Okay,
I
so
always do.
don't worry
I
about
always do.
not DMing people then.
I DM people too. It's separate. Because some people's disabled server notices. So. Okay. Peace be upon you, everyone. So Sister Bliss wants to read. Thank you so much. Read.
Can you announce the verses?
Yes, I'm putting it in the chat. Chapter 9, verse 64 through 72. Please read these verses first. Thank you so much. I put it in the chat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So from 964. The hypocrites worry that the surah may be revealed exposing what is inside their hearts. Say, go ahead and mock. God will expose exactly what you're afraid of. If you ask them, they would say, we were only mocking and kidding. Say, do you realize that you're mocking God and his revelations and his messenger? Do not apologize, you have disbelieved after having believed. If we pardon some of you, we will punish others among you as a consequence of their wickedness. The hypocrite men and hypocrite women belong with each other. They advocate evil and prohibit righteousness, and they are stingy. They forgot God, so he forgot them. The hypocrites are truly wicked. God promises the hypocrite man and the hypocrite woman, as well as the disbelievers, the fire of hell, wherein they abide forever. It suffices them. God has condemned them. They have incurred an everlasting retribution. God's system does not change. Some of those before you were stronger than you and possessed more money and children. They became preoccupied with their material possessions. Similarly, you have become preoccupied with your possession, just like those before you have become preoccupied. You have become totally heedless, just as they were heedless. Such are the people who nullify their works both in this world and in the hereafter. They are the losers. Is that okay? The losers. Have they not learned anything from the previous generations? The people of Noah, Ad, Samud, the people of Abraham, the dwellers of Midian, and the evildoers of Sodom and Gomorrah. Their messengers went to them with clear proofs. God never wronged them. They're the ones who wronged their own souls. The winner, the believing men and believing women are allies of one another. They advocate righteousness and forbid evil. They observe the contact prayers, salat, and give the obligatory charity, zakat, and they obey God and His Messenger. These will be showered by God's mercy. God is Almighty, most wise. God promises the believing man and the believing woman gardens with flowing streams, wherein they abide forever, and magnificent mansions in the gardens of Eden. And God's blessings and approval are even greater. This is the greatest triumph. O you prophet, strive against the disbelievers and the hypocrites.
I think that's
And
it. That's it. Until 72. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions or comments about the verses you read? Peace be upon you, everyone. We just read from chapter 9, verse 64, all the way through 72. Did you have any questions or comments, Sister Bliss?
I will listen.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions or comments about the verses they read? Chapter 9, verse 64 through 72.
Peace. Do we know the history behind the hypocrites here that God talks about in 64 and 65? What were they mocking?
Anybody know anything about the hypocrites in these verses?
My take is it's just that aspect of it's funny. I mean, so say for instance, we just had this incident. Someone they got jailed on the VC, right? And they put their profile picture as the murder of Rashad. And for them, this is a big joke, the whole thing, and they don't realize that they're mocking God and His messenger, His revelations when they do these kinds of things, and I think that's the this lack of seriousness of kind of what it is that they're doing. That's my takeaway from this.
But my
What if
question is, what happened during Muhammad's time? What do we know or not? To the that led to the revelation of this ayat.
Regarding the specific revelation, no. It's not in the context, but this is kind of a bigger theme of the Quran. And when something isn't deliberately spelt out, it's because one of three reasons. Either it's irrelevant. So if you look at like the history of the people in the cave, it says, some say that there was fifth, the sixth being their dogs. Others said seventh, and the eighth was their dog. It says none knows the true number except God and those well found knowledge. And it says, do not consult anyone about this, right? And it's not important. If God thought that this was relevant to the lesson we're supposed to learn, he would have included those details. The other reason is that it's there. We just have to dig in deeper. So if you look at like 5101, as they ask about matters that if revealed to them prematurely would hurt them. If they ask about them in light of the Quran, it'll become obvious for them God has deliberately overlooked them, right? And then the third reason is that it's established knowledge. When we look at something in these verses and it says, okay, well, yeah, what exactly was the context behind this? And it's not explicitly stated in the verses. We can say that it's either not important or it's there and we just have to dig in deeper. My take is it's like when I look at this chapter, parallels a lot with chapter 47. And there's two verses I'll just put in. It's 47:20. It says, those who believe said, when will a surah be revealed? But when a straightforward surah was revealed wherein fighting was mentioned, you would see those who harbored doubts in their hearts looking at you as if death had already come to them, and they were thus exposed. And then if you just go 10 verses ahead in 47:30. If we will, we can expose them for you so that you can recognize them just by looking at them. However, you can recognize them by the way they talk. God is fully aware of all your works. I think that this aspect that they're, mocking what's to come, or the verses, the revelations, that this is just indicative that they're hypocrites, they're not serious people.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe there's a hint of what they were plotting behind about the two fake verses. Like God already knew their intention there.
My question is for Peter then. So you said that there's people that they don't take it seriously. What about the ones that are taking it seriously and they're doing it to cause harm and pain for the believers? How do you view
You can
that?
think, yeah, you can think of it, the devil's going to push people in one of two ways. Those who profess disbelief, he's going to push them further towards disbelief. Those who profess, oh, they believe, he's going to push them to the other extreme to say, to go beyond the limits that God has designated. Um, and that's the way I understand it. So when it says that, we've made you an impartial community, right? It's like you're supposed to not go to one extreme or another. You're not supposed to be stingy. You're not supposed to be extravagant, and it's our duty not to let the devil push us in one side or the other. Take the example of what the traditionalists have done when it comes to the religious practices, right? And this isn't just like in Islam, this is all religions, right? You have a group of people who basically just absolve themselves from the scripture and the laws. Then you have another group that basically adds extra laws on top of what's already designated to make them appear more righteous. And I think, we just have to be conscientious not to go to one extreme or the other, but, stick to exactly what God has commanded us.
Thanks a
Yes.
lot.
And also, God is telling us that our source of law is Quran, should be only Quran. And it is important in order to not go for those of, when we believe, to really be content with what Quran has given us. And maybe in our personal journey, we try to do more, meditation or charities or something. But that's our personal journey. And we should not make that a rule. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes the believers, they're not content with Quran, and it's not enough. And they make each other's journey another rule on top of Quran.
I had a question about, or a comment, a question about 69. It says God's system does not change. And then it talks about preoccupation with this life and stuff like that. And it says, such are the people who nullify their works, both in this world and in the hereafter. They are the losers. So it says, if we become preoccupied with the material possessions, we become totally heedless. What do you guys think about this verse? I thought it was very profound.
I think it's important to consider everything as blessing of God. And so God says, I created the day for you to work and night to rest and meditate. And then all this, whatever we do throughout the day, have God in center of our attention, make God our God, and keep on improving or going in the journey of righteousness, because it's a really lifelong process. So inshallah, that's gonna and be with submitters, and this is mashallah great blessing that we are connected now 24/7. Alhamdulillah.
I put a verse that it just kind of reminds me, and it's interesting. So this was Surah 9, verse 69. Then if you read 7, 169. Subsequent to them, he substituted new generations who inherited the scripture, but they opted for the worldly life instead, saying, we will be forgiven. But then they continued to opt for the materials of this world. Did they not make a covenant to uphold the scripture and not say about God except the truth? Did they not study the scripture? Certainly the abode of the hereafter is far better for those who maintain righteousness, do not understand. So I think this is when it says that this is God's system, it's like, look, God is going to shower the human beings with blessings. And the test is to see how do we react to these blessings. Do we become unappreciative? Do we opt for the this world at the expense of the hereafter? And it's really to bring out what's inside our hearts.
A question on 64, 65, even 66. So he's talking about the hypocrites. In 64 says they are worried that the verse comes in and it exposes them. So that tells me, okay, what the hypocrites, do they know they are hypocrite? I mean, or they divide into different sections. Like there are hypocrites that they believe they are doing right, but they are everything they do is against, let's say, the commands. So they don't know what they're doing. And then there are hypocrites that they do what they do. They know it's against the Quran or God, but they still hang out to make things crooked. So it's two kinds of hypocrite that we're talking about here. When 66 says, do not apologize, you have disbelieved after having believed, wouldn't it be, and it says some of them will be pardoned, some not. And those who are pardoned basically wouldn't be the ones that they did it out of ignorance, and then those who are not pardoned is because they give lip service. Is that a correct understanding of who hypocrites are, and it's just not like one camp? There are different levels of them. What do you guys think?
I want to link to a article. I dug up all the verses on hypocrites, and I basically my thought is that there are different progressions, and where you see a hypocrite in their progression is going to basically give you a different kind of flavor of it. At the very onset, the hypocrite knows that they're being a hypocrite, but eventually, what ends up happening is they start morally justifying their hypocrisy. So you could say that it almost starts as you're a weak believer, to you start making excuses for yourself for your hypocrisy, to you whole hog accept your hypocrisy and you believe it's righteous. So depending on where you see the hypocrite in that kind of metamorphosis, you're going to get a different flavor for their hypocrisy.
And also I want to add in chapter, mashallah, that was well explained. In chapter 2, God talks about it like that's one type, I think, that it's like a disease in their hearts or mind, that they don't want, they have some weakness or disease that it hangs around, and then God says, I augment that. If so, when God wants us to reform, we need to, inshallah, put best effort when God brings it. I mean, no, only God is perfect, but we know that as we go through this journey, it comes to our attention, because it becomes it starts with a habit, and then if we don't improve, then it can go to the other direction. And then also there are hypocrites that they know that they're not believers, but they're there just to misguide or derail or create confusion. They know that they're not believers. So I just wanted to say that.
I wanted to add a comment about the previous verse we were reading regarding being getting worldly provisions and kind of seeing how we react. Twice in the Quran, God gives us this list of these that we're going to be tested. So one is in 2:155. It says, we will surely test you through some fear, hunger, loss of money, lives, and crops. Give good news to the steadfast. And then the other one is 3:186. It says, you will certainly be tested through your money, your lives, and you'll hear from those who receive the scripture and from the idol worshippers a lot of insult. if you steadfastly persevere and lead a righteous life, this will prove the strength of your faith. There's certain tests that every single human being, if they live long enough, they're going to have to experience. They're going to experience provisions. Are they going to be appreciative or unappreciative? They're going to experience fear, hunger, loss of money, dealing with the death of loved ones, loss of harvest, income. And the question is, okay, under these circumstances, do we wholeheartedly submit to God unconditionally? If we only surrender to God when things are good or when things go bad, and it shows that our faith is conditional. And this is part of the test of this world to see, okay, are we whole, complete submitters or only partial submitters?
Alaikum. I'd like to have a little bit of time to just address. For me, it's an elephant in the living room. It's that we're not perfectly. We're not an organization of people that all have a unified understanding of what submission is, of what the message is, and so therefore, we among ourselves, we find ourselves putting each other on the hypocrite list inside our minds. I commend everyone for being understanding that we're not supposed to divide each other because of hypocrisy. However, we see, for example, on one side, we're supposed to follow the Quran is our only source, and we should be satisfied with it. Absolutely, of course. However, that with the verse that talks about that God sends a messenger to explain, and Dr. Khalifa even saying that you will not that you will not be saved unless you have a guiding teacher. Things of this nature. And so, what does that mean? The explanation, and it's interesting if you delve into the word explanation. A good explanation, it requires simplification of terms. It requires putting things in a time sequence, in a logical format, which the Quran doesn't necessarily do time sequence. It's got things all over. It takes
suna bin Qur'ani ne a lissafin su suna bin abubuwan da ake ban ji ba komai
Hey, brother, can you wait for your turn?
Just mute them.
bari da
So speaking about explanation, just the term explanation, what is a thorough explanation? So God says he sends a messenger to explain things. Well, what's a thorough explanation? Well, question and answers is definitely part of explaining. You take questions, you simplify terms, you expand upon it. So when a messenger is doing that, and it comes in the forms of audios, submitters' perspectives, and videos, does that constitute being outside the Quran? And that's the question. I'm not asking that question. I'm making a point that there are those who say that is completely following Quran alone. And then there are those amongst us who would say, well, no, clearly those people are not satisfied with Quran alone because they are bringing outside sources, which is a really fascinating description, a way of looking at it. Those differences, they exist. It's in our family. It would be great if we could have scholarly and very level-headed discussions on that matter, because literally we're pointing the finger at each other in that, say, privately, possibly, and also it's in a subtext. You'll always hear it in a subtext coming out, with little comments here and there. And I think it's important to bring this stuff in the open and tackle it as as adults, inshallah. God, I mean, not that we're not adults, but I mean as civilized, scholarly, progressive thinking, people who want to be God's representatives and be like angels, that kind of thing. That's what I mean. Mashallah.
Right.
And God guide.
Mashallah. And I want to add to that when, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to reserve my space to say something.
Okay,
I'll
so
Anytime anybody give me a chance, I'm very happy.
I'll put you on the list, brother.
Thank you.
Could you
Can I
consider
talk?
going on stage, please? Stage, at least you can raise your hand and talk to each other. Thank you. Just a consideration.
Go ahead, Bliss.
Yes, so when God sends a messenger, it's a blessing from God to confirm the scripture and also
Mhm.
to clarify, the teachings that he brings, and it's all the explanation of messenger just as verses of Quran, that is word of God. We look at it in the light of the whole Quran. Explanation of messenger must be understood in light of the whole Quran. And so in having that in mind, then we might have slight different understanding about because we have to read Quran cover to cover, and it's a lifetime process.
But
And then so we need to take
Bliss, with all due
not
respect, please, we're focusing on the verses. I feel like this is just converting to a debate about the messenger's teachings. This is not what the verses are about. Can we just focus on the verses we read right now?
Can we
It-
let her respond? Because there was a long comments made. And so we need to be fair and let people respond to the comments as well.
Right.
No,
So-
no.
May I
If it's
just,
not
I just,
relevant, if it's not relevant to the verses, then no.
It's chill. It's cool. It's cool. Yeah,
Brother-
let's Godwin. We can wrap it this piece, and then let's try to get back to the verses, if that's okay.
May I interject just one quick thing? To me, this is like the heart of the hypocrisy issue that that the Quran is talking about in these verses. So I see the relevance. However, I do see that the size of this issue can derail the Quran study, and I acknowledge that.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Jeff, yeah, let's just we can talk about this more in depth, later and stuff. Bliss, if you don't mind, you can finish your comment, and then we'll continue with the list.
No,
And
no,
then
that's
Shaw,
fine
you can-
because it was brought up, and I just had to say that God says in even the whole Quran that is word of God must be understood in the light of whole Quran. So it's messenger explanation, and messenger even says that it's in light of the whole Quran.
Okay, homie, you're next. If you don't mind, yeah,
Yes,
let's try to keep it short, and then also Godwin, we
Sure.
can get back to the verse discussions.
I just want to talk to the verses. When God says in 2:115, He surely will test us through hunger, fear. One of the things embedded in that goes back to everything else that basically God talks about. God is doing everything. Here is telling us that He's doing everything. So if we believe in God, He says that we shall have no fear, no grief, no grievance, no fear. We'll have an external life in this life and hereafter. But here, God says that I will test you through all these things. Right? It's not contradictory. It's just that God's reminding us that He's doing everything. I think that comes to me, that the verses bring it out. And if that happens, many of those people who believe that they are believers and they believe in God can lose their faith. And that comes back to the point that this actually is linked with the stuff that our brother and sister talked about, particularly Brother Jeff. So that requires your wholehearted awareness about exactly what he's saying. And to me, when I became a believer, I'd be aware about my own intention, what my intentions are what guides my behavior and what I say. As God says again in the Quran, that I don't hold you responsible for your promises, but the intention behind that. And if that intention behind that is about deceiving oneself, just before that happens, we end up deceiving ourselves. So we couldn't even understand the verse that God says, I will test you through this. So that God not only testing our faith, not only God is saying that He is the one who is doing everything. And the other thing is that God is saying, just beware of your intentions. it is that intention that makes one a hypocrite. So it's not us calling someone else a hypocrite. The only reason why we say that is because God says that. But we may not have evidence for that at all. So it's our intention that's responsible. And when God in 2:115, God clearly says,
2155.
it is I that do everything.
Got it. God bless.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we read from 964 through 72. Gita, did you want to make a comment? If not, does Jeff, if you
I'm
don't mind,
sorry,
there's a little bit of
I have
background.
to, yeah, sorry, my comment was not definitely related. It was a wrong timing for saying we need a stage. But I do want to make a comment if I may.
Yeah, please. Good.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to follow up what Brother Homie said, and I thought it was well said. It is my thought that makes me a hypocrite. It's my ego. And when I'm thinking about like, oh, I really love God and I'm reading Quran, I'm learning from you every day. But it does happen to me that sometimes for some crazy reason, I think to myself, is this really true? Is this really, I mean, Gita, come on. And the way I behave, as he said, with my intention, which is my thoughts, thinking, the devil side of me. And when I think about it, and maybe I can become a hypocrite. And I could say, oh, am I really believing God? So it's very, very dangerous because we could for sure make ourselves become a disbeliever by us doing it to ourselves. Thank you, Brother. Excellent.
If I may make a quick comment as well.
Yeah. Please.
Okay. I think we read through 72, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So from 964 through 972.
Okay. So on 72, it says God promises the believing men and women gardens and flowing. So heaven is promised to them. I mean, by reading who hypocrites are and who are the believers, really, what is our intention is to make sure that we are among the believers and definitely not among the hypocrites. So going backward on the verses we read, so the heaven, and then prior to that, it does say believing men and women are allies of one another. And then prior to that, it talks about like two verses, 69 and 70. It does talk about some of those before you were stronger. They get preoccupied with material things. And then it says, have they not learned anything on that 70 from the previous generations? It's really pinpointing for us, those who want to stay online with believing in God and not to be diverted from it, is to also keep our eyes and make sure we know our history. Because whatever the example it seems like that we may be dealing with today, it has happened with previous generations. And there are plenty examples to look at to make sure we don't act the same way. That's something that I think God is emphasizing, that we have to learn from previous generation. We got to know our history. Thank you. Back to you.
I want to just read two verses. One is, it's going to be coming up shortly, but it's relevant to kind of this discussion. Is 986. It says, when a surah is revealed stating believe in God and strive with his messenger, even the strong among them say, let us stay behind. Meaning that, striving can be uncomfortable. It's going to get us outside of our comfort zone, but it's something that we should, mandate upon ourselves. And the other verse that comes to mind is 1828. It says, you shall force yourself to be with those who worship their Lord day and night, seeking him alone. Do not turn your eyes away from them, seeking the vanities of this world, nor shall you obey one whose heart we rendered oblivious to our message, one who pursues his own desires and whose priorities are confused. Does anyone else have comments regarding the verses we read from chapter 9?
Yes, I do. You can put me on the list.
Sure. Go ahead. No one's on the list. Go ahead, homie.
Okay, so I mean, to me, that rings a personal tone, because I was a Shia and I read the Quran. And I read, unfortunately, the translations of the Sunnis, which were, I understand now, those surahs were basically trying to prove outside sources. A lot of that was basically trying to prove that hadith was right, which did not make sense. In fact, I was confused. I was reading the Quran. I was confused, and it wasn't until it was through the guidance somehow when I got to know Rashad Khalifa and I read his translation, when I actually understood exactly what Quran was about, what the message was about. So going back to the previous two verses, I can't go back and call myself a hypocrite. I just didn't know. I was genuinely confused. And all the surahs that were revealed, to me, this is what I felt before God guided me towards submission. It's exactly what I thought. I just stayed behind the stuff that I didn't believe, and I couldn't. So that tantamounted to me losing my faith, and then I forced myself to be with those who believed, which were, I went to masjid, I spoke to the imams and so on and so forth. But it became worse. It became worse because what they were promising, and exactly in the second sentence, nor shall you obey one whose heart be rendered oblivious. But I couldn't actually see that because I was trying to hold on to the faith that I had, which God speaks in the last two verses that you guys read. Verse 2, 115, and Surah 3. So this again goes back to what our brother Jeff was talking about. It is not the point that we should call someone else a hypocrite, or I sit here and I see myself, I was genuinely confused. And these two last verses that our brother put up perfectly describes my situation. So when I found out there's a submission server, and when I got into it, I realized that my thinking, how I was guided to read the Quran and understand the Quran through our messenger, was the right way. So everything in my life changed. But then when I think about it, I think, yes, when I hang around the people whose hearts are oblivious to our message, I get more misguided. And then, but not a hypocrite.
Right. Yeah. God willing. Anyone else have comments about the verses? Developers put a verse. Oh, Ferry, was that you?
I can go. Yeah,
Okay,
but
go
I
ahead,
can
go
go
ahead.
after you if you were about to say something or share a verse. I can wait.
No, please. Yeah, I'm just filling the.
Okay, peace be upon you all. Mashallah, some great comments. were made, and I wanted to share a couple of things. You know, we read verses about hypocrites, and I think it's, mashallah, as it was to kind of reinforce this idea that we want to look at and examine ourselves. That's where we benefit. Doesn't help us to try to figure out for anybody, you know, anybody else's situation, but it's helpful for us to examine ourselves and see where we can improve or where we can do better. And I think at the same time, it's also good to be careful that, you know, Satan may whisper to us to make us despair, may whisper to us that, you know, you're a hypocrite and you're not real, and so we also want to be careful about that, to seek refuge in God and not let Satan kind of drive us towards despair and to give up. And I also wanted to point out that, you know, there's the journey, like as was pointed out, or Brother Varsh shared part of his journey, and so we all have a journey, and there's a timing that God, out of His wisdom and mercy, brings the message our way or guides us to the truth. And so we may, and part of that is that we may have doubts along the way. Like there's the Surah 49, I think it's 14 or 15, that talks about like the difference between a submitter Muslim and Mu'min believer. And so, and someone who's a believer has reached certainty. All those doubts have been eliminated. So yeah, it's 49, 14, and 15. That in 15 we see that the believers are those who've attained the status of having no doubt whatsoever. So along the way, and you know, and God says, don't say that you're there until the belief is established in your hearts, but God says you should say that we're Muslim submitters. That's in 49:14. So there may be doubts, and we want to, as also was alluded to, and we want to use the tools that God has given us, including seeking refuge in God and asking God for guidance and clarify things for us and strengthen our faith, and we don't want to harbor doubts, because then, yeah, we could go the wrong way. Just wanted to share that in case it's helpful. Thanks.
Can you also put me on list, please?
So mine,
Sure.
yes.
You
Wait,
put me on
Bliss,
the
why
list.
don't you go first, and then wait, who is the last person? who
Zina.
spoke? Zina? Okay, cool. So
Thanks.
let's go Bliss, Hassan, and then Zina.
Okay.
Bliss?
Yes, mashallah, along the same line, you know, we all at different times might commit sin or hypocrisy. That doesn't make somebody disbeliever. We know that everybody coming on earth, you know, they have committed sins or hypocrisy, but some of them God calls them even at the time of birth that they're believers. So committing sins or hypocrisy or having doubts, it doesn't make a believer disbeliever. It's a journey, and we all grow in our understanding. And as our brother Jeff said, you know, we have different understandings and about things that are, you know, sometimes not clear, and we have to look at it in light of the whole Quran, and that doesn't make somebody hypocrites, and we are not to call each other, God forbid, hypocrites. Inshallah, God, you know, it's a journey, and our understanding also evolve, and God makes things clear to us.
MashaAllah. Thank you. Well said.
Hassan, you want to go next?
Sure. If I remember correctly, you know, God calls Quran also His messenger. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes,
So
that's
on
His prophet.
986, you uploaded, it says, when a surah is revealed stating believing God and strive with His messenger, even the strong among them say, let us stay behind. So, you know, these individually, when we look at that, striving with His messenger, meaning, in this case, Quran, you know, thinking of this applying to us today. The striving with the Quran thinking of every situation, troubles, difficulties we go through, that if we're going to take side, if we're going to do something to improve ourselves, if we're going to get involved with our community, striving has to be with the what is stated in the Quran, the commandments in the Quran. And now it would be a great test for each one of us looking at that to see what is our own answer to that. Nobody is going to come and ask us, but what is our own answer? When we come across those difficulties, are we really applying the teachings that God has sent us through Quran or not? So I can see that individually this verse can really touch us one by one. It's a examination of our, it's sort of a test to see where we stand with this particular verse. And that's pretty much it. Back to you. Thank you.
Can I say something, please?
Oh, wait, homie, I'll put you on the list. Zena, you're next.
Thanks. So I have a question about regarding the verse that you just read about forcing yourselves to be with other believers. And so a few of us think that that's, forcing ourselves to be and going to Quran studies. And so do you guys think, so I have a few questions. Do you guys think that that means that you have to attend every single Quran study based on that verse? And what if there's an online Quran study? Do you have to choose your local Quran study versus the online Quran study? Obviously, there's like no answer that's in the Quran, but I just want to know your opinions. This is something that we've like discussed in our community several times, and I just want to know what your opinions are. Thanks.
Salam alaikum. MashaAllah.
So,
Yeah,
Did you want
want
to? Wait. It's there's
Yes,
a Bliss. I want
okay,
to put you on the
go
list.
Yes, please.
Okay. Homie, it's your turn.
Yes. I just wanted to say that I address our sister the last point very short. This is 4:00 in the morning in here, and I've got a pretty heavy schedule today. But since there is so many of us that are going to come to this Quran study, I come, and I usually go to the other Quran studies that I can. So God guides you to the one, and it's again my intention and my choice to go in, and I specifically come to this one because there is a lot of submitters whose ideas I can benefit. The other point that I wanted to mention that goes back to our brother Hassan mentioned in 1986. It is true, it's personal, and a strive with his messenger. For me, that strive with his messenger was this. When I understood submission, what Quran was about, and I read it, the issue of Rashad Khalifa and disregarding the last two verses of chapter 9 became an issue for me. That became an issue. So what I did was I started understanding, I started reading of what Rashad said, what his reasoning was for excluding those two. And to me, that was a strife. And I think for him also that was a strive to try to show and prove that those two verses were added. And the argument that I had that Quran says is complete to be protected. So I couldn't bring myself to accept Rashad as a messenger when he says, when God says the Quran, we protect it. And then I'm reading our messenger saying those two verses are satanic injections. And when you add 9 plus 128 plus 129, is a multiple of 16. So those two verses, when you add them, you can add them to yourself. 9 plus 128 and 129 is a multiple of 19. So that striving that God says in 986, and strive with his messenger. And when I found that strive within myself, trying to convince myself that this is correct, and I realized the striving with the messenger, what it meant. And when I understood that strive, everything resolved it for me. And that strive was completed when I completely understood what the role of the messenger was in terms of the miracle of number 19. Thank you.
Bliss, you're next.
Yes, so the sister that asked, mashallah, whatever is in Quran, we cannot add to that. And, you read it and understand it. And now, mashallah, we have both submitter communities in person and online. So as long as you don't desert, you're studying with them and striving, and then everybody has their own situation. So we cannot make rules in addition to what God says in Quran.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go for it, bro.
Yeah, I just want to say regarding the Sister Zina's question, peace be upon you. Regarding the Quran studies, I don't think there's a specific set number that you need to attend, but you just have it on your mind and you attend them regularly, right? But to say that it has to be every 3 days or every 4 days or every 2 weeks or month or whatever, I don't think really that's the issue. The issue is that that's just something that's on your mind, and you attend them, within reason. But to say a specific amount, if there's 5 a week and you have to attend all 5 and otherwise you lose credit, I don't think it works like that personally. That's my understanding. And so you just do whatever works and whatever you can, and you have Quran studies on mind. And for me, being on this server has really been beneficial because, Quran, you think about it, time of Rashad, there was Quran study 2 hours a week on Friday nights, and that was it pretty much. And it's like here we're on a 24 hours a day. I try to be on 12 hours a day every day talking about the Quran with people. All day, every day, and it changes the whole dynamic of what it means to spend time with the believers and constantly talk about God. So I'm able to utilize it, and I think other people also utilize it to the extent that they can implement it into their lives and benefit from that. But obviously, in addition to the Quran studies, I think there's a lot to gain from. Thanks.
Gallopers, I don't know if you can talk. You've been putting some good verses and stuff. Do you want to talk? Do you want to?
Can I make a comment too whenever it's my turn, please?
Go for it, Taslim. Yeah. Don't have anyone
Peace
on.
be upon you all. Happy Sunday or studies on this server. It's a blessing. To add on to the comment our sister made. So the way I view it from Quran is that God tells us Friday prayer is an in-person physical congregation. And therefore, we must drop and give that priority. It's actually spelled out in chapter 62. So thereby, when Friday prayer is established, you have a masjid. And now you have a physical masjid. So with that, you need to support your physical masjid as well. Now, of course, in today's time, we have the era of technology, social media, these server, wonderful things. And those are God's gift, right? But the way I see it is that when you do have a community and you do have an allocated place called masjid, you need to support that physically. You need to go there for the Friday prayers to show support. Of course, it's an obligation for a submitter. But then if there are Quran studies once a week or twice a week, you can do as much as you can. Those are the things you would need to support your local community. And that way it will grow and they will also get to know you. And then, of course, the more you can strive, the better on Zoom, on Discord, all the other options or blessings that God has given us. This is how I see it, and this is how I understand it. Thank you.
Yeah, to add to that, I think, the connection between the verses we read and this concept is striving is not by its nature going to be convenient, right? You're going to have to forego other things. And I think a lot of times, like you see kind of the deterioration of morality, and you need to take kind of an active approach, but it's easy to just be passive and hope someone else does the job. And then we're all in shock when we see like the fabric of society starting to break down. And I think that that aspect of like, yeah, striving to make sure that we're advocating justice, good deeds, and condemning anything that is against righteousness, evil behavior, is kind of the process of the striving. Um, I think Zeno, regarding your question, yeah, it's like, do what you can. I think if you make it a priority, that's the main thing. But the reality is like, look, you have other obligations in your life. You have a responsibility to your spouse, your children, your family, your job. It doesn't mean that, hey, we're just going to be sitting in Quran studies or meditating or praying 24/7. I think the objective is, how do you infuse, God into all other facets of your life. But when you have the opportunity, we should just be eager to take that up. It kind of reminds me. There's a quote. It says like, how much charity should you give? It's like when it starts getting a little uncomfortable. So it's like whatever that limit is for you. You're doing good. So it's like, okay, how much did you force yourself to be with the believers to make it to Quran studies? Okay, when it gets, it's clearly getting to a point of inconvenience, I think that's probably a good sign, but not to the point where it's taking over your life. Does
Thank you all.
anyone
God
else want
bless you.
to comment or a question regarding the verses? So for those who join later, we read from Surah 9, verse 64, talking about the hypocrites and their character trait, and then he ended at 972, and we haven't talked about 70, 71, 72, and there's some other elements from within the verses that we haven't discussed. I wanted to make a comment regarding just this general principle, like the metaphysics of how I think this world operates. Um, and from my understanding, it's like the way God designed this world, is whatever it is that thoughts we entertain, we're going to see those in manifestation to be tested by them. So if you take the example of Satan, right? Satan had these supercilious thoughts. God created the condition by which Satan can see for himself why he made the decision to basically enter hell. He's voluntarily saying, "I want to go to hell because I want to prove my point." And I think God does the same thing for each one of our lives, where He creates the conditions so we can see for ourselves what our true intentions are. Right. So He's going to put us in these situations that are uncomfortable, that might seem like a blessing, but if we don't apply them correctly, they're going to be a huge curse for us. Um, it kind of reminds me of the verse in 67. It says, "They forgot God, so He forgot them." Like the fact that God was not part of their mind, was not the priority of their thought. God was never manifested in their life. And because of that, they end up going astray. And there's another verse. I think this is the verse. 150. I think this is. Yeah, this, praise God. It says, "You shall remember me, that I may remember you, and be thankful to me. Do not be unappreciative." Like, it's impossible to be uh, appreciative and be miserable, to be appreciative and be a disbeliever. These two things basically they go hand in hand. What's interesting is even the word for unappreciative is kafarun. When it's used as a in connection with the blessings, it's translated as unappreciative, meaning that if someone is a disbeliever, by nature they're also unappreciative, and if someone's a believer, then by nature they're also going to be appreciative.
May I go on the list, please?
Yeah, go ahead, brother. I don't have anyone.
It's a beautiful point that um, Brother Dude just mentioned. Yes, not only God designed his structure, but he allowed that structure to be used. The best example I would say is chapter 12, Joseph. This guy was, and throughout the Quran, is only one place throughout, not the Quran, chapter 12, when we realize his encounter with the wife of the governor who liked him, and if God says if it wasn't because we supported him, he would have fallen for her and she would have fallen for him. But I was talking to a Muslim Sunni, and he was saying that he's got a problem with slavery. But as Brother Dude suggested, this was a structure of the time, and this is what I said. The example was from Joseph. He was sold as a slave. So God basically used that structure that already humans had. It's not that God says that I can guide every single one of you, make all of you a congregation. So God doesn't do that. God allows the systems that we have put in place and evolved and used those systems because God says, I am the best schemer. So the scheme was that we have slaves. So Joseph became a slave. It was through that slavery that he became the king and the ruler of Egypt and brought the children of Israel from the desert into a country and gave them everything. So yes, I agree, Brother Dude. It's that structure that God provides. And however, God also works with the structure that humans provide for themselves. Slavery at that time was one of them. I'm sure that God would have found a different way of achieving his means with Joseph, but God chose the structure that humans have set out. And none of them know except God. In the beginning, his brothers thought they're going to kill him. But God knew that wasn't the case. It's something else. So that whole aspect of slavery to me is important here because that's a structure that God sets out. But through that slavery is where Joseph reaches the heights. And lying and hypocrisy that he goes to prison. These were all the structures that prepared him for the biggest achievement of his prophethood. So he had to go through all those steps through the human society that he's created. He has to doubt, he has to exist in prison, and then he had to basically spend even more time in prison for nothing that he'd done. This is conspiracy. But these were the structures that were at the same time existed. Power of someone over everyone else. So whether it's a lie, everyone's going to accept that because of the position of that person in that society. And these were the structures that we laid out. And every single one of these structures, God says you will not do. You will not lie. You would not condemn an innocent person. You would not talk behind their back. All of these structures are used in chapter 12 of Joseph. And these are the structures that we put in place, but the scheme of God altered them. So yes, we have to exist, and this structure is extremely important. And when God says this, it makes us aware of that.
Peace be upon you.
This
Sorry,
is
brother.
part
Could
of our
we keep the comments short?
responsibility. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. God bless you. Now we're in the open section of the Quran study. So if you guys have any questions or topics that you want to discuss outside of the verses that we just discussed, that's also okay as well. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Did we want to let Brother Homie just kind of wrap up his comment? Or were you done, Brother Homie?
Yeah, sure. If no one else has any comments, we could, Brother Homie could go on for a few more minutes, but let's keep it short. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. My point is this duality of God being present. And God says to Moses, you cannot see me because there's nothing powerful enough. The mountain explodes next to him. But yet, God is in every step with us. He attempts to change our societies through us. So it becomes so that's why the Quran study is important. That's why for us getting together is important, not only reinforcing an opinion of understanding what God says, but this is exactly what we create. Every single one of us are creating that whole big picture. God will work through his scheme through us, but it's us who are creating this structure. If we want peace in the world, this is where we go. This is where we go. This gathering in our Quran study, this gathering in our Friday prayers, and this is how the world changes. And every single one of us are separated with 6 people from one another. Just 6 people. And that's the rule of mathematics. The mathematics is published and established extremely well. The paper is in Nature Journal. You can always go and download it and read it. It's an old paper. So it's this connection that creates a society because of other connections that we have. And God uses that. God uses our community and our connection in his purpose, because this is something that we are allowed to create. Thank you.
God bless you, brother. Thank you so much. Are there any others that would like to share some insight?
I wanted to speak, unless Triple A, were you gonna speak? We haven't heard you today.
No,
I can go see you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Praise God. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Brother Homie. And yeah, mashallah, it's God can, if we align with his system and we want to be among his righteous believers, God can use us as channels, as instruments. He's doing everything like we see in 8:17. At the same time, he can work through us, allow us to get credit and benefit our souls, and that's a great blessing. And 971, I think, relates to that, actually, that we read today. That it's a beautiful, heartwarming verse, 71 and 72. The believing men and women are allies of one another. They advocate righteousness and forbid evil. They observe the contact prayer salat and give the obligatory charity zakat, and they obey God and his messenger. These will be showered by God's mercy. God is almighty, most wise. So God says we're allies of one another, and we want to, God willing, we want to strive to be allies, to help and support each other in righteous causes and deeds, and advocating righteousness, forbidding evil, doing the practices. Mashallah, Friday prayer was mentioned. This is something we can come together and do together and encourage and support each other in our paths. And God says these will be showered by God's mercy, which is awesome. And then 72 talks about God's awesome promise for believing men and women, this beautiful allegory of paradise that's eternal, gardens, flowing streams, magnificent mansions. And then it says, and God's blessings and approval are even greater. This is the greatest triumph. May God help us to attain that. Thanks.
Salam
Thank you
alaikum.
very much. Go ahead, Sister Bliss.
Yes, mashallah, beautifully said that God encourages to be ally of each other in their righteous works, and at the same time, we all have weaknesses, we make mistakes. To advocate righteousness, forbid evil in best possible way, but do not control, and let God teach us, and we all each have a journey.
Can I be on the list, please?
Yes, go ahead, brother. I don't think there's any more comments at this moment.
Okay. The issue that I wanted to raise is that in terms of being each other's ally, I was an ally of a brother submitter who happened to have mental disorder. And he was on his path to become a submitter, and he gets caught. We've got a place in Sydney called King's Cross, and at that time there's a lot of drug dealings and stuff is happening. He had, I don't know what he had, cocaine or some powder in a bag, and he gets arrested by the police, and then he drops the bag and he pummels the bag, so he loses all the evidence, and he gets captured. He's a young brother on the way to submission, and he had no advocate. He couldn't even get a lawyer, just didn't know which way was up. All he did was told me that was his case. And I said, okay, I'll support you, because he's on the way to submission and he needs help. So I went to court with him, and I sat next to him at court. He had no one else in here. And there were about 8, 9, 10 police officers as witnesses. And they were pummeling him. This guy was saying this, that guy was saying that. And I put my hand up, and the judge sent the court secretary to speak with me privately. And I said, this is injustice, because this person has no defense, and I would like to be his defense. So he goes and speaks to the judge, and judge have me stand up in the court and says, are you a lawyer? And I said, no, sir, I'm not a lawyer. And he said, okay, I cannot let you speak in court, but what I would do, I would let you counsel the defendant. And I went to him and I said, calmly, just ask, who was your arresting officer? Just one by one. So he stands up and he said, I said, do you see him here? He said, no. I said, just stand up and ask the judge. So your arresting officer comes forward. And he stands up and asks, none of these were my arresting officers. And judge looks at them, and they're not here. And then I said, well, ask them if any of them are present. None of them were present. And I asked them, where was the basically the evidence and everything else. So they actually told exactly the judge that says, but basically he was engaged in a contraband activity that is illegal in our country. I made myself his ally. By the way, the case was thrown out of court. He got scot-free. He got scot-free out of that charge because it would have been a serious charge. The amount of drugs that he told me that he had, he would have been arrested. He would have been in jail, and then he would have been discontinued his path to the submission because he's young and he doesn't know what he's doing. He's made a mistake. So I took it upon myself as saying that God says, like, the first time, first offense, you forgive them, you let them change. So yes, I allied myself. You can please make comment about that to a submitted brother who actually made a mistake, and that was a mistake, was wrong, and I would not be defending anyone else who's out there trying to have drugs in their possession. But I don't know why at that time I did it. And alhamdulillah, it was successful for him at that stage of his life. And he was only a young guy. He was in the early 20s. He's in the early 20s. And I also knew that he had some psychiatric disorder. So I made myself ally and I participated in something that I think was wrong, but I tried to be an ally of a submitter.
Thank you very much, brother. God bless you.
Thank
Does
you.
anyone else have any comments? No one? I had a question for you guys. On the topic of, lying or misrepresenting the truth, I can remember two examples of God's prophets doing this in the Quran. One being that Prophet Abraham, when he destroys the idols in his town, when they confront him, they say, "Oh, who did this?" He says, "Oh, it's the big idol. That's the one who did it." I mean, it's kind of like a really ridiculous response to them for them to understand how stupid their belief is. But at the same time, he was misrepresenting the truth. He was not honest. And it was the same case with Joseph when his brothers come to him at the king's palace, and he basically puts the king's cup in his youngest brother's bag to take him away from them, and then puts the blame on that young brother. So like these things, like kind of lying, misrepresenting the truth, do you guys think that in certain contexts it's okay, or is it that they made a mistake and they had to repent for it later, or maybe some other view on these events? What do you guys think?
My understanding is
Can I
the
be
only
honest?
time you can lie is if your life is in danger. And I caught myself doing a white lie recently, and I was so upset, and I repented to God. And it's like you just get pushed in a moment. You'll say, you give a white lie, and it feels so bad afterwards. I was so upset with myself, and I repented.
That's a good point.
But if you're put in the moment, you may very well just give a white lie. Someone comes to you, and you have like a sensitive acquaintance kind of relationship with them or whatever, and they're like, how do you like my hair or something? And then, and you're just quickly on the spot, you're like, oh, it looks nice, But it's like, but that's a sin. And even the messenger explains we don't compromise on even a little white lie, you know? And yeah, I feel so bad, right? God says utter the correct utterances. We have to always be truthful, and it's kind of
A
hard to
lot of
navigate.
people,
Another
a
one I
lot of
struggle
people
sometimes.
are be offended.
Yeah, even me, a lot of times I struggle with like God willing. Like,
Mm.
you know, especially new people that never interacted with me before. My first interaction with them, I have to say God willing right away. I will say it, God willing, I'll say it, but it's kind of strange because I'm always thinking, okay, they're gonna judge me, they're gonna think about me, and I think about this stuff. And sometimes I mess up and I repent for it, you know?
Mm.
And I ask God to help me do better next time. These things are important, but they're not easy, you know? They're not easy at all. I had the incident with my judge in the court I work in, and she got upset at me for saying God willing. And we had a whole meeting, and she said, "You're disturbing the secular nature of our legal system." And I just had to stay strong. I couldn't do anything. You know, I just have to say God willing. And even this is in the Quran, and also the messenger just emphasizes that no matter who we're talking to, we have to say it. And if someone wants to like me less as a result in that, then so be it, I guess. You know, there's nothing, I can't do anything. Somebody wants to judge me or think poorly of me or, you know, make fun of me or whatever, just it. I think these are mini tests, maybe.
Mm.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Interesting. Let's see
Can
what other
I
people have to say.
can I be
Go
on
ahead,
the
brother.
can I
Mohammed.
be on the list? Yeah, but in the two cases, in Navid cases, I think I just have to just say something like that about, you know, when people ask me how good my hair is, yeah, I probably respond the same. But in the two cases, our Abraham messenger and Joseph, God says, I would not take you responsible for what you promise, what you do, but I hold you responsible for your intention. The intention behind what our brother Abraham said was the correct intention. So that basically automatically makes it not a lie. And the intention behind Joseph, that wanted to bring his family back to Egypt, makes that not a lie. So I think when lie comes in, is that intention God says that you promise, but you have a tendency to manipulate and use other people. If that is the intention behind using and manipulating people, that complies with God's description. But the intention with the prophets does not make them a liar, because the intention behind that was righteous.
I have, were you done, brother? I also had comments on this, but want to let you finish.
I have, thank you.
Okay, praise God. Yeah, I'm not sure, it was an interesting discussion. I'll share my thoughts at the moment. Regarding Abraham, I think that it was obvious that it was not really like, I don't consider it a lie, because I think it was obvious to them that he, because he said, go ask them if they can, go ask them. And they're like, obviously these cannot speak. And they knew that he had done it. And that's why they threw him in the fire. It was not like he accused somebody else of doing it. And so I think it was like a rhetorical, he used that as a kind of a situation to basically help them like see how absurd their idol worship was. So it's different from saying that, accusing somebody else of doing that. And in Joseph's example, there was something that, he did something and it appeared like his brother had stolen the cup when he hadn't. However, so we know that like God communicates to us through his messengers, and these were both messengers, and so God may work through them to do certain things, and that's different from us. So like in the case of Joseph, there's a verse that talks about how God perfects the scheme for him. So this may have been, I mean, God knows best, but this may have been inspiration from God that God used. And it was a situation where, like in both cases, nobody was hurt. So Joseph warned his brother before doing this, saying, don't be saddened like by what's to come. So he kind of gave him a heads up. And then this allowed him to keep his brother, that, was probably better for him to be with Joseph and the others. So there's a lot of good that came out of it, but still, we don't want to use, the ends do not justify the means. It's just that I think these are messengers there in communication with God, like God communicates with them, maybe different ways, like spoke to Moses directly. But anyway, I think these are different situations that us ordinary people, and even in these cases, like we see how it was good things that came out of it. But I think it's different for us. Yeah, mashallah, like it was said, I think the exception is based on the verses. What God allows is like 16:106 that says, this was alluded to, but just want to bring the supporting verse. 16:106, those who disbelieve in God after having acquired faith and become fully content with disbelief, having incurred wrath from God, the only ones to be excused are those who are forced to profess disbelief while their hearts are full of faith. And the footnote that Dr. Khalifa has put is, God's wisdom decrees that if someone holds a gun to your head and orders you to declare that you disbelieve in God, you may grant him his wish. What the heart harbors is what counts. So this is a kind of in these kind of situations, somebody's forced to say something because they're in danger. I mean, that's the wise approach, is to do that, to avert a danger that should not have been there. So there are situations that God allows, like for instance 3:28 is another one that says, this is a little different, but it says the believers never ally themselves with the disbelievers instead of the believers. Whoever does this is exiled from God. Exempted are those who are forced to do this to avoid persecution. God alerts you that you shall reverence him alone. To God is the ultimate destiny. So that's why God is the ultimate judge. God is the best judge. Only he knows, what our responsibility is in each situation. And there are certain situations where God may exempt from something that should not be done. At the same time, we know that as believers, like in general, we need to be truthful. So that's what I wanted to share at this moment. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to just, for me, it's interesting. So let's look at the concepts that we've looked at here. We've looked at the concept that it's the intention that counts. We've looked at the concept that it's different for messengers or prophets. We looked at the concept that it was God's schemes. God did the scheme, so it's not even Joseph. And we all acknowledge that that you can deny your faith if you're threatened with murder. So there you have. What I was able to identify is 4. I want to start off with the first one, intention. Dr. Khalifa made it really clear about the whole intention thing. And he said, and that traditionally, this whole intention notion in traditional Islam has kind of been taken wrong. Dr. Khalifa said, it's your intention when all actions appear to be perfect. That's what he said. It's for example, so you can't say, well, I meant well, so therefore I'm excused. No, it's not about meaning well. It's that you were patient, you're thoughtful enough, you did the due diligence, and you did the correct actions. That's where your intention counts. So he made that very clear. So that muddies that argument. The idea that the different, so let's look at the second one. Are messengers held to a different standard? Can they do things that I don't accept that one. I would like to hear that one establish some kind of, if that's a Quranic doctrine, I would like to hear that one fleshed out some more. I don't think we can just guess that, oh, perhaps for messengers it's different. I just saying I don't know of any Quranic doctrine or any explanation by Dr. Khalifa that is the case. In terms of God, it's God's scheme. I just have a problem just in the case that God never advocates vice. He never does the thing. And so then it enters in, well, was it Satan? And I don't know. I think what Brother War Thunder had said is his question is really good. I don't know the answers to these. And we all do agree that we can lie if we're threatened with murder. That literally is such a mercy from God that He doesn't hold us to that extent to where, you know, He doesn't test us to that extreme, and that's such a mercy. And I just wanted to kind of review everything from that perspective, and then ask War Thunder brother what he gleaned from this, the whole conversation.
Yeah. Please, Ivan, just 1 second. I want to ask everyone to please sign up for our next Quran study on Sundays. Please tap on interested. The link is in VC1-chat. Thank you very much. Sorry, what did you say at the end of your? What was your question for me, Brother Jeff?
I'm wondering. Okay, I'm just curious. I agree with you on those. I don't know where to place those. You know, what's the justification? I don't know what category to put it in. I wanted to ask you, how do you do it?
I'm very confused because I was reading the verses. I was reading chapter 14 about Prophet Abraham, and I was like, okay, he clearly did not respect the idols of the idol worshippers, even though we believe we have to respect the idols of others. He goes and destroys them and lies on that and doesn't misrepresent the truth. But, you know, given that his life was in danger, that's acceptable. And then there's the case with Joseph. He's basically scheming against these, you know, wicked people. And the reason why I say this, I do think, because in the Quran it says, Abraham sets a good example for the believers, and even mentions one of the mistakes he has done. He says, that he made a mistake on Abraham's part, that he asked for forgiveness for his father. It doesn't mention that he went and like destroyed the idols. So there are some things that I feel like might have changed with the Quran. So the laws that we have might not have been the laws that, you know, the previous generations had. And that's in the Quran, that, you know, we decree different laws for each community. So like this law of, you know, basically respecting other idols might have not been in effect during Abraham's time. I don't know. So that's one thing. And for Joseph's scheming, I think my understanding is that it's okay to scheme against the disbelievers. It's okay to deceive them. That's my personal understanding from these stories. Now, this might be extreme. Many people might not agree with me, but let's hear what other people think.
MashaAllah. Thank you. And I'll just add one thing. I think Sister Fari brought a good argument with regards to the Abraham incident it was, now, she wasn't addressing the destroying personal property issue, but she was addressing the issue of the sarcastic remark that it wasn't necessarily lying. There was just blatant irony there, and basically throwing their argument in their face in a sense. And so to me, that is, I think that's a quality argument on that. It doesn't address the destroying personal property issue. The other thing is that it's okay to deceive the disbelievers. You know, Dr. Khalifa talked about actually the Jews doing the exact same thing. In fact, it's that's the verse. They actually believe that you can lie to the Gentile, to the Goyim. And actually, the Quran addresses this aspect, and so did Dr. Khalifa address that. No, you cannot lie to the disbelievers. You cannot deceive the disbelievers. You can't do that. And you may bring up, well, what about war? Okay, I don't. I'm that now. I would be in the dark in a case of war. You know what that you don't do. But at least that was addressed. That literally, that concept of okay to deceive disbelievers is something the Jews actually doctrinally support, and Dr. Khalifa went right up against that one. And that's all I have. But you did add one more category. You added the category of the possibility that God's law changes over time. So God's system doesn't change, but God's particular laws, maybe they become more strict over time. Interesting. I just wanted to review that. Thank you.
Would you put my name down, please? My name is Gita. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Gita. No one, I think, is waiting to comment. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, and God bless my teachers and my great friends. I just wanted to say something that Navid said, and it makes a lot of sense to me because I completely know what he's talking about when he's talking about him and the judge. So I wanted to say that he's telling the judge, God willing. But he's telling the judge, it's not your judgment, it's not you. It's God doing everything. I'm here for a reason. I'm paying for the consequences for a reason. And you are judges here for a reason. And this is all in hands of God. And that and consequences of my action would be in hands of God. Whatever God wills will happen. And the judge gets pissed off. What do you mean? Why the judge, not God. But there is another thing he also said, which was a very interesting point, and that's the first part is Navid. Now the second part is me, Gita. Now, I'm so attached to me and my beliefs, and I think I know it all, and I know this, and if I know that if I don't do this, I'll go to hell because that's what I believe. But you know what that belief is? It's only my ego. God is the one who's in that the court. Voices and things are happening. That's God. But all of a sudden, look at me, my belief. I believe. And don't ever talk to me about my belief because I can kill people for my belief. I believe if I believe and you attack my belief, you know what? People have killed other people for their personal belief. So I believe my personal judgment between me and the judge, if I believe the judge is wrong and I believe I'm wrong, then I'm destroying myself and everybody else's. Because now I'm fighting with belief, not the consequence. But excellent. Nabi, thank you for sharing. I learned from
you. Can I get on the list, please?
Yeah, go ahead, brother. After that, I think Brother Douglas is trying to speak. Inshallah.
Yes.
So, all right, go ahead, Brother.
Yeah.
Brother Douglas,
Okay, I just want to go back to lying. God always has a reason for us to say, although we are created this way. One of the most important thing lying does, the most devastating is that there's a lot of studies have shown that in fact lying alters your brain activity. There are a lot of studies that you can look at, people who knowingly lie, and then versus on the same experiment, the same sort of stimuli, that people tell the truth. You start seeing that the brain of the liar is altered, right? So different networks get into play. And Hebrew learning says that the networks that work together bind together. So that could form a habit because our brains alter. The other thing is trust, the notion of trust. One of the things that I never did with my son was lie to him about anything at all. If I was wrong, I came out to say I was wrong. I apologized, right? I never put him in a situation where he lied or forced him to lie, because I said everything is a mistake and we could learn from that. So he never learned to lie. Lying is part of the way that we actually teach our kids or other people, by putting them under duress, and basically it becomes a defense mechanism. You know, I give you a short example that you know, if you make a cake for the guests, and little Johnny goes to the fridge and has a bite of it, you find a piece of cake on Johnny's nose. You got two approaches. You say, "Did you touch the cake?" And then you're angry. You're big parent. He will try to preserve himself. He says, "No, I didn't." But once you see the evidence, the other approach is that, "Johnny, I told you not to touch the cake. It's the guests. You can have it if you wait." So you don't basically threaten the person to put in a position to lie. So you don't teach them how to lie, because trust goes out of the way. The other thing that lying does, it destroys the trust. So in terms of Abraham, there were no trust between them at all. They didn't trust each other. So when you consider that lying basically alters your brain, and in the case of Abraham, his brain was completely solid towards the truth. So he couldn't have possibly been a lie. So his brain was altered, because our brain physically gets altered when we lie. And the other thing was the trust. Lying completely destroys the trust. And that's the only thing that you and I and our society relies on to survive and to grow. This is what I wanted to say.
Brother Douglas, please go ahead.
Salam alaikum, everyone. I'd like to point to two verses. I'd like to refer to Surah 7, verse 21. When the devil whispers to you any whisper, seek refuge in God. He is here, omniscient. When a person lies, when they're intentionally telling a lie, God created in our nature a warner. We all know this. God created in our nature that whenever Satan whispers, and Satan is a liar, God says, seek refuge in God. In other words, when a thought comes to mind that is evil or wrong, God is created in our minds and in our nature, when we seek the truth, that we are aware of it and we are commanded to seek refuge. Okay? That's my first reference. And my second reference is in Surah 17, verse 38. 38. All bad behavior is condemned by your Lord. All bad behavior is condemned by your Lord. In the cases, we would assume, of Joseph and his brother, in the case of Abraham, They knew that Satan did not prompt them to do what they did. That was not a whisper from Satan. Quite the contrary, that was not an evil, nor was it a whisper. It also does not, in the context of the situations, and God controls all matters, and God controls and knows what is in the mind, it does not constitute bad behavior. When God in Surah 17, verse 38 says, all bad behavior is condemned by your Lord. One of the things that, when we read and take the Quran in its entirety, well, some people will say, well, how do you know what's bad behavior? How do you know what's evil? Well, God tells us in the Quran, generally, He's shown us the two paths individually, and that He protects those who believe. He protects those who are honest. Do you see what I'm saying? And I'm open for comments in terms of the examples that were given here. These were not, in fact, they were not, when they are understood in the context of what the situations were, they were not actually, they were not evil. This was not evil conduct. These were not examples of bad behavior. And I'm asking for anyone to contribute, to enlighten, to clarify. Satan did not whisper to Joseph and Abraham when they conducted these acts. Any comment, any reaction?
Mashallah, I think that's a good point, brother. That looking at that big picture of like what's good behavior and what's bad behavior, and yeah, I wanted to just expand on a couple of things as well. If you were finished.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
the only thing is, God willing, I just want to emphasize that while on the surface it appears, somebody says, well, they were lying. They'll say that Abraham lied. Well, that wasn't actually a lie in as much as that it was, as someone had said before, it's obvious. It's obvious that the statues could not speak. He wasn't lying to them. He was jarring them. He was trying to jar them into being, reasonable and submit. And given the fact that God tells us in the Quran about Joseph, God said that had they followed the law of, was it the governor? Had they followed the law of the governor of the land, this would not have been resolved the way it was resolved. But God is the best. God is the one in total control. So this was all part of God's plan, such that they did not follow the law of the so-called land, of the governor's law. Someone can comment on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, mashallah. I agree that it's different from like someone. Sorry, was somebody going to speak? Or there's an echo. Maybe somebody's unmuted. Okay. Thank you. Whoever muted. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And Abraham was a father of submission. He may have been commissioned by God, inspired or somehow commissioned by God to do these things. And there's the verse that is subtitled like Abraham debates with the idol worshippers, where he's saying like, this is, the sun is not my Lord, the moon is not my Lord. And there it's like he's using that as a tactic, like a debate tactic to get the message across to them. And so that's what I didn't mean that the messengers are above the law. They're humans too, and they have to abide by God's law. That's not what I was saying before. What I was saying is that because they're chosen by God and they're commissioned by God to they have certain duties, to give God's message of worshiping God alone, and each one has their role, like Dr. Khalifa defined what his duties were, that they may be commissioned by God or inspired by God to do certain things, and that's between them and God. So in the case of Joseph, it was I pulled up the verse. It's 1276, and it says, he then started by inspecting the containers before getting to his brother's container. He extracted it out of his brother's container. We thus perfected the scheme for Joseph. He could not have kept his brother if he applied the king's law, but that was the will of God. We exalt whomever we choose to higher ranks. Above every knowledgeable one, there is one who is even more knowledgeable. So this is, again, it seems like God worked through Joseph so that he could keep his brother. And, we have the context of what the brothers did to Joseph, and this is the younger brother. So it was God's wisdom was probably better for him to be with Joseph in a much better position and situation than, it seems like the family, the brothers, and they were kind of in a tough situation. They were coming to Joseph for provisions. So the wisdom of all of that is with God. But again, this is something that, God may inspire or work through someone to do something, especially in this case of like messengers. But we can't, to me, I can't generalize that and say, then this is okay for me to do for my own, to fulfill my own, goals or desires or whatever. And then I also think that it's a good point that, we are held to the standard of the Quran now. Like, people before us who didn't have the Quran, like, people came a long time ago. Like in the past, it was different. Like God holds us responsible based on what he has given us. And now we are held to the standards of the Quran, which one of the verses is 2205, where God says, as soon as he leaves, he roams the earth corruptingly, destroying properties and lives. God does not love corruption. And we know that we also need to be honest with all people. So that's in, this was alluded to, but I wanted to bring the verse for support of that this is exactly what the mistake that others made, thinking that we don't have to be honest with the Gentiles, and that's in 375. That Dr. Khalifa has subtitled, Be Honest with All People. Some followers of the scripture can be trusted with a whole lot, and they will give it back to you. Others among them cannot be trusted with a single dinar. They will not repay you unless you keep after them. That is because they say you do not have to be honest when dealing with the Gentiles. Thus, they attribute lies to God knowingly. Very powerful verse, very clear by God's grace. And so we want to be very careful. Of course, there's exceptions that we've talked about, like in Surah 16, where Dr. Khalifa gives that example in the footnote. The verse says, the only ones to be excused are those who are forced to profess disbelief while their hearts are full of faith. So it's that kind of a situation where there is a force, and in my understanding, there's some, there's some danger. That's what kind of, and one example of that is like, given in the footnote is kind of my understanding. May God guide us to the correct understanding. Thanks.
God bless you, sister. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add or reflect on any specific verses related to this Quran study or maybe some other topic? I did think of something. I believe I heard someone earlier. They were wondering if the messengers are held to some other standard, and I know many people provided some insight regarding that. I did like to mention that while it's not necessarily the a higher standard than other humans, because they had the duty of being a messenger, there were additional rules for them, right? For example, Muhammad was not permitted to write other teachings in God's name, right? But I'm not subject to that same restriction. I can right now make up a whole new book and say it came from God, and God may not necessarily stop me, right? But he was clear that Muhammad, he would definitely seize him by the right hand and stop him, right? So this is a technical difference in treatment between Muhammad and the other non-messengers, right? And while this is not necessarily saying that he's held to a higher standard, there is a slight difference in treatment. And this is all I wanted. This is what I reflected on. A second example is Jonah, right? When he sort of rebelled against his mission, and then he continually lost to some sort of gambling game on the ship when they were deciding who to throw overboard, and then got swallowed by a whale. Yeah, that is likely part of God's plan, right? And perhaps someone else, it's not every day someone gets swallowed by a whale and survives, right? And so this could also be technically Jonah was held to some sort of different standard of treatment because he was supposed to accomplish his mission and he rebelled, right? So this is just my perspective in that the messengers and prophets did not necessarily get to be treated the same way as other people, right? Not that they were
brother,
special. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just going to interject that I think the discussion, it wasn't necessarily held to a higher standard, a different standard. It was the idea that they were allowed to do things that the rest of us aren't allowed to do. This is the notion. And it goes to, maybe the story of Moses following the messenger or following the servant. We know that it's probably an angel. That's the best we can come at, is probably. But then if you look at it in terms of being a human, then you see, well, there's murder involved, there's destruction of property, there's these things that clearly we're not in a position to judge. And so it opens this idea that there are servants of God that are allowed to do things that that the rest of us aren't. And the question would be, well, are messengers in that? And therefore, when we see the possibility of Joseph lying, does that fall in that category? You see what I mean? The category of the extension of allowances, or because it's in God's cause, this kind of thing. You could also throw in the idea that when God decrees war for you, then in the case when you're it's in self-defense and in destroying the enemy, there was a lot of allowances there. So it's this allowance thing. If you could address that.
Yeah, so I don't know if there was a special rule for them. There may have been special restrictions. There was this verse in Surah 3, Surah Al-Imran, verse 161, even the prophet cannot take more of the spoils of war than he's entitled to. Anyone who takes more than his rightful share will have to account for it on the day of resurrection. This is when each soul is paid for whatever it earned without the least injustice. The last phrase, without the least injustice, from my perspective, this would mean like if the whether the messenger received preferential treatment or even harsher treatment, that from my perspective would be an injustice. So I feel like they would probably be treated equally across the board, but this is just my 2 cents. Mr. Raju, did you want me to read this? Or did you want to take over, Mr. Raju? So Mr. Raju here, he says, this is also something that was allowed for the prophet, but not other believers. Surah 33, verse 50. O prophet, we made lawful for you your wives, to whom you have paid their due dowry, or what you already have, as granted to you by God. Also lawful for you in marriage are the daughters of your father's brothers, the daughters of your father's sisters, the daughters of your mother's brothers, the daughters of your mother's sisters who have immigrated with you. Also, if a believing woman gave herself to the prophet by forfeiting the dowry, the prophet may marry her without a dowry if he so wishes. However, her forfeiting of the dowry applies only to the prophet and not to the other believers. We have already decreed their rights in regard to their spouses or what they already have. This is to spare you any embarrassment. God is forgiver, most merciful. Yeah. So this, with regard to this, there's a lot of ways people can read this. One thing to note is that I believe in all other cases that the husband has to provide a dowry for the wife, and for Muhammad, he himself may not have had. He had married several wives, and many times is out of compassion and a desire to help, right? And so it's not always the case that he was always able to. It may not have always been a simple matter for him to provide a dowry for every single person, and this was to avoid him embarrassment in the future, so that people do not demand dowries. I'm not sure exactly. If anyone else has a suggestion as to why God had provided this for the prophet, they could chime in. Yeah, Mr. Robert, this is our interpretation, right? God gave us all the details here, and we can only glean from what he has given us. So if you have your own understanding, please feel free to share. Mr. Robert? No? Does anyone else perhaps want to provide any?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know this, but this was a surprise to me in the messenger audios that we're recording, I think in 1983, the discussion happened about the why Muhammad in history had 9 wives, this kind of a thing. And that would be another allowance. And actually, Dr. Khalifa went on to say that there is no restriction in the Quran in terms of how many wives. The restriction is that if you have the wives, it's that you better be doing it to relieve suffering, this notion. But at this time, in this argument, God says in the verse, he says 2, 3, 4, but it doesn't say not 5. It doesn't limit it that. It's just increasing. You may have 2, 3, 4. So he points out that this erroneous concept that Muhammad was given the right to have more wives, that's from Hadith. It is not the restriction to 4 is not even it's not a Quranic understanding the way he explained it, which was interesting to me. I had never considered that God says 2, 3, 4, but that doesn't mean he's saying an increase in others. But I just want to reiterate that Dr. Khalifa was always insistent that the only reason to do it is to relieve suffering, and it's it's not something you look to do, and absolutely not for lustful reasons at all, and completely was for a monogamous relationship, and that these are extreme situations. I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, I do believe the verses do indicate that it's to do justice by orphans or disadvantaged family member or disadvantaged members of society. I wish I could recall the exact verse. If anyone recalls it, we can bring it up. But
Yeah,
yeah,
please go ahead. Please finish, and then inshallah I can share, brother.
Well, I wanted to note that we recognize the Hadith and Sunnah as satanic innovations. The fact that the Hadiths themselves place a cap on 4 is evidence of that, right? Because it's basically saying, oh yeah, God restricted, and technically God didn't restrict, right? So that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, if you have the verse, Ms. Fari, I'll put it into the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, this is another whole big discussion, but yeah, it's so Surah 4 verse 4 is I was actually gonna share this. It actually I'm sorry, 4:3. That's from 4:3, and the subtitle by Dr. Khalifa is Grounds for Polygamy, and it says, if you deem it best for the orphans, you may marry their mothers. You may marry 2, 3, or 4. If you fear lest you become unfair, then you shall be content with only one, or with what you already have. Additionally, you're thus more likely to avoid financial hardship. And then it refers in the footnote to Appendix 30. And then later in the same surah, I believe it's verse 129, around there. Let's see if that's, that Dr. Khalifa again has subtitled Polygamy Discouraged. It says, you can never be equitable in dealing with more than one wife, no matter how hard you try. Therefore, do not be so biased as to leave one of them hanging, neither enjoying marriage nor left to marry someone else. If you correct this situation and maintain righteousness, God is forgiver, most merciful. Again, refers to Appendix 30. So I think this is one of those situations, and I think Appendix 30 explains well that polygamy, this is the first sentence of Appendix 30, polygamy was a way of life until the Quran was revealed 1400 years ago. So again, God is kind of bringing light and changing something that was a part of the fabric of society. And like, you know, bringing these kind of changes, it's hard to make it overnight. And I think kind of a more effective and wise approach is to kind of gradually do things. And so then God says that, okay, you know, this is like 4:3 that we read. This is the grounds, like this is where it's allowed. That only, you know, because you think it's best for the orphans to give a home, then you may marry their mothers. And it clearly says you may marry 2, 3, or 4. So that's what's allowed. This is my understanding. That God is saying this is what's allowed in terms of polygamy. Even in this verse, God is discouraging polygamy because it says that if you fear lest you become unfair, be content with only one, or with what you already have. And then he encourages that by saying, additionally, you're thus more likely to avoid financial hardship. And then in 129 says you can't actually be equitable. So it's like you put 2 and 2 together. God's really strongly discouraging polygamy, like the subtitle says. And Appendix 30 says, by the time the Quran was revealed, the world had been sufficiently populated, and the Quran put down the first limitations against polygamy. So it's actually very ironic that people think of Islam as the religion that allows polygamy, but it's actually, when the Quran was revealed, God started to put down the limitations against polygamy. So, thanks.
Right. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Marshall,
Can I comment on that quickly?
No, but before we move on, do you know, I just wanted to say, you guys, we were talking about the exceptions of messengers, that messengers have exceptions. And I didn't mean to derail that conversation, which I thought was very good, because that's kind of what Brother Warthunder brought up. The point is that were messengers allowed to lie? Wasn't this a lie? This kind of thing. And the context of this question wasn't necessarily, we can move on. I just want to say, the whole context of it was that Dr. Khalifa said that the restriction at 4 is an innovation of hadith, that God was just increasing the amount, stopped at 4, just in the concept of increasing, and then pointing out that it's erroneous hadith that Muhammad himself was allowed to have 9 wives, but not the rest of us. That was a doctrine that he pointed that out in the messenger audios of in the 83. So that's the point.
It's also in the footnote, and I just want to say he never refuted that. He never said that, no, that's not what it is, right? And this is interesting in regards to this example of 2, 3, and 4. I used to see it the way Sister Fari did, if I understood her correctly, that this is these are amounts that are allowed, 2, 3, or 4. But from what I understood later, from the Arabic grammar and the way it's linguistically, it's not actually setting a limit. It's just giving examples, right? And we have the similar thing with the wings of the angels. He says they have 2, 3, or 4 wings. But what's interesting, the verse says they have 2, 3, or 4 wings, right? But those are not the only options. And actually, this is interesting because in the messenger's what is it called? The script of his movie, he actually talks about angels with 5 and 6 wings. So he understood it, that it's not a limitation. And of course, Rashad himself refutes the 4 wives thing because he says that the prophet had 9. And also, it's not limited to the wives of orphans because we know of at least 2 marriages the prophet had that were not because of orphans, right? That's Aisha and Maria. They were not orphan-related marriages. And so 4:3, although it is a giving an example, Rashad never says that this is the only possible example. And yes, polygamy is discouraged in the Quran, and it says you cannot be fair with more than one no matter what. However, we shouldn't go beyond that. And I don't recall the messenger ever saying that there is a cap on 4. Instead, he says this cap comes from hadith. So we need to be aware of this when we're making this argument, because we'll get stuck with a bad logic or bad argument.
God bless you guys. And does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add?
I think I understand verse 129 a bit differently. First of all, peace be upon the submitters. Hello, everyone.
Peace.
So the verse says, obviously, and we all agree, it says you can never be equitable, but it then gives advice. This is what I say. It gives advice on how to absolutely not deal with having multiple wives. It says, don't be biased as to leave one of them hanging. Meaning the Quran gives advice on how to deal with the situation of having multiple wives. That's what I read. And it says, if you correct the situation being neglecting one of the wives, and maintain righteousness, that means not to leave one hanging, then you could continue to practice. That's what I see.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Mr. Robert. I do believe that is the correct way to read that. Basically, if you happen to be in a marriage with more than one wife, try your best to maintain equitability and equality between them. Do not lean too much towards one and abandon or neglect another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. But I believe it to say that if you're able to do this, then you get a green light. Maintaining righteousness, to maintain righteousness is to not leave one hanging. I think that's what it says. Because being equitable, that's something you cannot achieve, even though you might strive for it. All right? The correcting the situation is don't leave one hanging. Don't do that. And if you don't do that, then you're maintaining the righteousness. So, yeah, that's just my point of view.
Blessing to be able to share our understandings, and we know that we learn and grow, and our understanding may change. And that audio that was referred to was from 83, which is quite early on. So again, I think we need to be careful in what we do with the audios. Like, we need to have first of all, we need to have the right context, the right understanding, be remembering right, and then things may have changed and evolved. So there was a reference to a footnote where he said the same thing. I don't know. I think somebody made a comment that there's a footnote, but I'm not aware of that. So if someone can point that out. To me, the verse is clear, but I don't want to insist on my understanding. We can all, as humans, we can all be wrong, and May God guide us to the correct understanding. Regarding for 129, I do want to just add, because this one we haven't discussed as much, that Dr. Khalifa actually clarifies in the verse that it says, therefore, the part about therefore do not be so biased as to leave one of them hanging. Dr. Khalifa clarifies, neither enjoying marriage nor left to marry someone else. Says, if you correct the situation, maintain righteousness, God is forgiver, most merciful. So the verse before it is talking about divorce, and God discourages divorce. However, this is my understanding of this. Again, may God forgive me and guide me if I'm mistaken in any of my understandings, that this is a situation where the divorce may be justified, because if you're married to multiple wives and then it's hard as a human being to be equitable, and then one of them is going to be feel neglected, is going to feel like they're hanging because they're neither enjoying that monogamous marriage that God has recommended, and it's his system, nor left to marry somebody else where they can enjoy that with somebody else, then that's not a good, fair thing, situation. So I think, to me, this one is clear based on, mashallah, Dr. Khalifa's clarification in the of that verse. Thanks.
Yeah, can I respond to that quickly? Yeah. So I just think it's problematic when we can just kind of dismiss something the messenger said, say, oh, this is too old, or it's isolated, or it's not significant enough. It just becomes problematic. I think the only time we could use the age card is if, or like the dating of an item, is if we have something additional after that that refutes it or updates it, right? Or some explicit reference to it that said, okay, that was the old understanding, here's the new one. But if there's no new understanding, I don't think we can disregard an existing understanding. So I think
Peace, guys. So I
yeah.
don't think this is true. Just saying out of the bat, but like a Quranist can argue that since there is a restriction on men getting additional wives, that's the restriction the Quran puts. But there's no restriction on women getting additional husbands whatsoever, so it's allowed for them, right? So how do we argue against a future Quranist saying something like that?
Well, the women don't pay dowry, so they wouldn't be able to marry anyway, right?
What? No, they can get another husband who pays them another dowry.
No, but okay, but we learn from the Quran that man's the captain of the ship. So if a woman has multiple husbands, then it's not going to work, because there can only be one captain of the ship.
Well, she can have multiple ships.
No,
Like multiple homes.
No, because it's going to be conflicting.
To do something,
In legal terms, this is a conflict, right? In legal, we have this in the court all the time. So, for example, if I have two clients that are married to each other, I can't represent both of them because they have conflicting interests. Now, in this situation, the two men have conflicting interests. They each have their own interests, and yet the person at the center of it or involved with that is their wife. That would not work. So you have to be conflicted out.
But look, the captains can be like, okay, well, you can be co-captain. Like I'm just saying, like all of these arguments you're making can be like counter-argued, you know? I'm not saying it's true, but like I'm saying, like a Quranist could go that route, right?
I just don't see any basis for female marrying multiple people, I guess. I mean, it just goes against the foundation of what it even is, right? So the whole point of a man is being the father figure, right? He's being the provider. He's the father figure, right? He's the captain of the ship. These qualities don't apply to the female. So it would just nullify her, attempt to get more husbands. I don't see any basis for that. I don't see any foundation for such a position. I mean, I guess we can try to look at it more and get more direct verses to address that. But I was addressing a deeper issue when it comes to the teachings of the messenger overall, is that I've heard this many times and say, well, this one is, old, or this one is, and I just don't think the old argument works, because what is the cutoff? We're going to say, oh, well, this is really old. This is 83. But if it's 88, then it's not sold. If it's 89, it's not, you know what I mean? Like this, I don't think God made it like that. It's just, look, this is the information. If there's anything that goes against it in the future, then it overrides it. If it doesn't, then that's just what it is. You know, because otherwise we're just opening a can of worms and Pandora's box. And, you know, to say, well, I see the verses this way and it makes sense to me, I don't think that's a good argument either, because, you know, anyone can see the verse in multitudes of ways. It's not a strong foundation.
Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, I like the idea that we can address this thing head on, absolutely head on. And I think absolutely this idea that you're safer to ignore explanation by the messenger of God, that you're safer to do that. You know, because look, I hear it almost weekly. Look, you got to know the context. Well, you have to know the context of the Quran also when you're doing it. You have to, and it's really odd because literally these are Quran studies where a verse is mentioned and the messenger is explaining the context of the verse. And so really what the challenge is that, well, you don't know the context of the verse that he's talking. It just gets so convoluted. What do you mean? He's talking about a verse and he's telling us the context. He's explaining it. Guess he's explaining it with questions. That's what's a good question. A good explanation. It simplifies things for people. It allows people to ask questions so that he can elaborate. This is literally the definition of explanation. It's putting things logical. It's bringing up examples. And this is literally what these audios are. And to somehow say, well, just in a general statement that, well, we just don't know the context well enough. What do you mean? It's a Quran study talking about a verse, talking about the context. So I really challenge, I think that's very clear. I like to, take the position that, look, this is information from God through the messenger, and that we are not safer by ignoring it. That literally just look, we got the Quran, that's enough. Literally, Dr. Khalifa says in the last 5 submitters' perspectives, he's making it clear, look, you're either with the messenger or you're not. And he's like saying, look, if you don't have a guiding teacher, you're not going to make it. He even goes to the point that Gabriel said, look, if you don't stand with the messenger, you're out. So these are very strong in the last 5 submitters' perspectives. It's a continual theme. And so, that's my position. That's the way I take it. And so when I hear this, you're safer to just kind of not pay attention to that noise. I kind of think, it's your own loss. It's your own loss. That's what I think.
But Jeff, this is a good point you raised. I think you made a really good point. Why did Rashad in the last few months shift his focus away from Sunnis and turned it towards Quranists? And he starts going hard against the Quranists, calling them hypocrites, misguided, wicked, all these things. Why do you think that is?
It's because of the internal, because there was a definite recognition that, there was a division between the Qasim Ahmeds, the Subi Mansours, these kinds of things. He was hearing these arguments. He was hearing the types of things that they were saying. He was seeing Suzanne from, I can't remember where she's from, but anyway, she was making the arguments
Susan Ray from Montenegro or whatever.
Your message is the Quran, and it is, she was very, I can't remember what she said, but your message is the Quran. Well, his message, it was all Quranic, but it was information derived from it.
Do you believe the messenger is authorized to explain the Quran?
Well, if you believe the Quran with 519, how can you not? I mean, that's 519, so there it is.
A lot of submitters, they cannot wrap their head around this, that God authorized the messenger to explain the Quran. I feel like that's a really big hurdle in submission.
I acknowledge the difficulty. I do acknowledge the difficulty. What I don't think that it's good enough just to address it by saying, well, you're just supposed to follow the Quran alone and not address the difficulty with this problem. I think it's an honest difficulty. I think, gosh, how do we follow the Quran, the whole Quran, nothing but the Quran? And then we listen to this stuff too. I don't get it. I mean, I get it. I understand the confusion, but to just say, well, it's just safer to follow the Quran, look, because it's too hard to look at. I don't buy that.
Right, and I agree with you, but I think in order to get to that level, you need a sufficient exposure to really get to, okay, what is the Quran? And this is a constant issue that comes up here. We have discussions, right? What is the Quran, right? Because if my quote unquote Quran is just Rashad's English version, I've had this conversation with you, and I think it just gets problematic, right? Because then now we're saying that his translation is separate from his explanations, which doesn't make sense because I think his translation is just a piece of the overall explanation of the Quran. He didn't get divine dictation of those specific verses. It's an overall package where he's translating the Quran and explaining what they mean, and that's it. It's a whole thing. And so to negate one or the other, I see that as problematic.
I do too, because I here it's with the verse that says none can grasp it except the sincere. To me, that
5679.
Yeah, none can grasp it except the sincere. This is a tremendous concept. What it is saying to us is that, look, unless your heart's in the right spot, you're not going to get it. And so a lot of these explanations or descriptions are describing understanding the Quran from the right heart, from the right place. And it does, and I agree, these descriptions, explanations, look, if God's not guiding you, those aren't going to help either. I get it. Nothing's going to help. So I can't see how one is standing by the messenger, by somebody who is going to him to judge in their affairs and saying, yeah, and here I hear and I obey. I don't see how excluding his life's work, the body of his life's work, a half of it at least, the whole explanation. How is that hearing and obeying? How are you safer?
Well, it's not, but hold on, Jeff. I think the issue arises is what do you do when you come to a conclusion based on your interpretation of the Quran that goes against or does not agree with an understanding that Rashad taught about that verse in an audio or video or some kind of material? That's where it's the rub, right? What do you do in that situation?
Brother, I say to myself, Jeff, you're not very wise yet. You need to just step back and accept it. That's a truth, and you just don't understand. And that is not a comfortable place to live in. People don't like that.
That's a very humbling, submissive thing to do. That's killing your ego. That's basically humbling yourself. That's submitting.
Well, see, can I interject here? I feel like part of the problem is that we want to follow God, we want to obey God, right? And part of the lesson that God has told us is we follow the Quran alone, because that's God's words, right? And so I think part of the disconnect is trying to understand that the messenger and the explanation or what he says regarding the Quran is not necessarily disconnected from what God is trying to show us, right? And I think part of the problem is that we're concerned, we're worried. Are we repeating past mistakes, right? Because I think that's the problem. If you look back, if you look back what happened with Muhammad, right? He delivered the Quran and only the Quran, and he was not even permitted to talk about an explanation regarding it, right? And then people decided, oh hey, you know what? He also said this, and he also said that, and he also ate this, and he also wore this, and he combed his hair like so, and etc. And people suddenly said that, oh, if we want to be as righteous as possible, we got to be just like the messenger of God, right? And this got twisted, right? And then now 1400 years later, we got another messenger of God. He's like, hey guys, all this is not true, right? You're supposed to just follow this book, right? And the problem is that this messenger, he comes along, he's allowed to say things regarding the Quran. He's allowed to open it up, point out a verse, and say, hey, yeah, this says this. So understand that part of the wisdom is that, right? X, Y, Z. Right? And people are concerned, hey, I don't see the wisdom you're speaking of in this verse. I don't see it. May I, if I don't see it, am I supposed to disregard what you're saying? And people say there's a whole new test, right? Because they realize they don't want to fall in the trap of Muhammad and start taking things they're not supposed to take. But now the other side of the spectrum is when you reject things you are supposed to take. And I think that's where people are concerned. They're worried, right? What do you think we should do in this situation?
Hey, AAA,
Yeah.
we have breaking news. Brother
Yeah.
Robert has done us the service to humanity and all of us. He actually found the verse, and I knew we're gonna find something, God willing. I knew it, but I just didn't let's spend time. He basically refuted it. 424, first sentence. This is regarding who men are allowed to marry. It says also prohibited are the women who are already married. There you go. So that proves that a woman can only have one husband.
That's actually really good.
It's really good, Robert. God bless you. Look, God, the Quran is complete, perfect, and fully detailed. The moment we think it's not, or there's some loophole to get around this, it's there. You just have to dig for it.
Wait, did Paragon provided this? Oh, praise. God bless him.
That's my question, though. How does God? You guys believe that? God can just bestow a good argument to a very horrible person? That's really interesting.
Well, time out. All right, Mr. Paragon is not a horrible person.
All right. Let's not backfight. All right. So hold on. So anyway, this addresses the question of a man can marry multiple wives. Can a woman marry multiple husbands? And 424 addresses that. It says also prohibited for marriage are women who are already married. So a woman cannot marry more than one husband. That's finished.
Praise God. Actually, that's a really good argument. Yeah, we were talking about it in the chat if anybody's following along. But so I think it's good to like think like the Quranists just to anticipate their arguments and to already have like defeaters in mind, right? So I think this was a great exercise, praise God. But yeah, I actually did not think like that. I think God bless you, Robert, for pointing that out.
Yeah, God bless you, Robert.
Praise God.
And so, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. So yeah, I think that it's good to it's good to worry about our own necks, and ultimately God is the judge. He's the one who knows who's sincere. He knows, and we may be blessed with a lot of knowledge, wisdom, but we may not have the right understanding of everything. I'm talking about us humans. Like, I think my understanding is that the message that Dr. Khalifa left is what God wanted us to get, and it's what we needed for salvation. And at the same time, we know from examples that he also evolved and grew, and the important things were clarified, were updated, like the things that, for instance, regarding zakat and the prayers. There may have been other things that he may have, his understanding may have grown, and the audios and the videos, they're blessings. I have listened to them. I do listen to them. I suggest, it would be helpful in content sharing to post these videos that are being referred to, videos that are being referred to, so people can access them for themselves. And I think ultimately, as we know from 6:114, that the Quran is complete, fully detailed, from other verses as well. We have a whole surah that's titled like detailed, that the Quran is detailed. and it's our source of law. And it's a blessing that Dr. Khalifa, that God has clarified and explained things for us through Dr. Khalifa. He had his role, his duties that he's defined. And at the same time, it's God who guides, and it's God who is the teacher of the Quran ultimately. And it's a journey for all of us. The Appendix 30, it does make it clear, like Dr. Khalifa has written Appendix 30, and he says the Quran put down the first limitations against polygamy. So there is limitations that are placed. And actually in this same appendix, it says providing a fatherly figure for orphans is the only specific circumstance in support of polygamy mentioned in the Quran, 4:3. So this is, again, now we have the Quran, so this is what we are to go by. And this is from the appendix that Dr. Khalifa wrote and left for us. So, and then ultimately, God is the judge. We cannot say because of this, somebody is not obeying the messenger or is not supporting the messenger. That verse that talks about come to you to judge in their affairs, that's when the messenger is alive. We cannot go right now to Dr. Khalifa and say, what do you think about this? I'm saying this, he's saying this, which one is right? So, and absolutely, the verses also need to be considered in their context. So I think I don't want to insist on my understanding. Like I said, I recommend that we reserve this discussion for when other members who've been around for many years, and some of them have been with Dr. Khalifa, that we do this at that time, because then you won't hear it just from me. You can also hear other people's inputs that it's along the same lines.
I just had a question for you. Since you brought up
Brother
this.
Naveed, this is something that I suggested. I don't want to be cross-examined. This is not court. And I share what I'm comfortable with. And then ultimately, God is a judge. He's going to judge.
No problem.
The resurrection, it's going to be all clarified.
No problem. I can direct my question towards AAA. Peace be upon you, AAA. Are you able to answer a question in the context of what Sister Fari just raised?
You go ahead.
And also, sorry, I'm going to be leaving in the next few minutes. So if I don't have a chance to speak before then, I don't have anything to say before then. Peace be upon you all, and may God bless you all. Thanks.
God bless you. God bless you. So, Pete, so AAA, what I saw and what she said was, I see where it says providing a fatherly figure is the only specific circumstance in that, but the question is that the only possible circumstance? And so the question is, in the next paragraph, immediately, it says that Muhammad had political marriages. So the question is, this verse already came down and then Muhammad got married to these other people. The question is, do we believe Muhammad committed a sin, or is it like what Jeff is saying, he had a separate category? I don't think it's either. What are your thoughts?
From my understanding is that there's no how do you say while the Quran discourages polygamy, it did not restrict the polygamy for only one case, right? There could be many reasons.
Do you believe the Prophet committed a sin marrying Aisha?
I don't believe that.
Do you believe the Prophet was exempt from God's law regarding polygamy?
I don't believe that either. No.
Right. So then that means that what he did was lawful, and it's not just lawful for him; it's lawful for everyone.
That's correct. I do believe that the Quran does discourage polygamy, but it does not make it a sin to engage in polygamy, even if they're not in a disadvantaged state. Right.
So we can say that polygamy is discouraged. We all agree on that. And in terms of limiting polygamy, it's true. Rashad is correct. The first limitations against polygamy in all of history are in the Quran. And it says you cannot be fair with your multiple wives no matter what you do, right? And try to be satisfied with just one. That's clearly stated in the Quran. It's not in the other scripture. So that already right there, that's a blanket limitation on polygamy, right? But in terms of the specifics, I read what Sister Fari read, and I see where someone can come to that conclusion. This is the last sentence of the third paragraph in Appendix 30. It says, providing a fatherly figure for orphans is the only specific circumstance in support of polygamy mentioned in the Quran. That's true. But the question is that the only possible permissible? Is that the only permissible circumstance? Rashad never said that, right? And so I feel like that nuance is really subtle and could really take us in a different direction. And I think I've fallen into that in the past myself.
I get it. I get it.
Could I bring up? Okay, if you guys are still on that, I wanted to respond to Sister Fari before she left, but maybe it's too late. But it was.
No, she's still here. Go ahead. She's still here.
Yeah, no, it's. I've heard she represents a view out there that's very solid. It has a lot of people who represent this view that when obeying the messenger or taking taking judgment from a messenger, that only means while he's alive. Now, look, I know Dr. Khalifa established that that's what prophet means when the Quran is saying prophet, but I don't believe that that's what it says with messenger. And I was just thinking of just a basic one. If you think about it, Abraham told his kids, look, this is how you do your salat prayer. And literally, it's only because Abraham told us that we do it, because God told him, and then they told it. And literally, we're taking the command of a dead prophet messenger in that context. There's an example. Also, I mean, it's just kind of goes against anything. Like anything Einstein said is as soon as he's dead, that's it. It evaporates. You got to go to square one. Go back to, Newton died. That's it. Throw the Principia away. You can't use this information. These kinds of things, like holding yourself accountable to the judgments that the messenger made. Even after he died, this concept, you would have to throw away Christianity completely, because Jesus died. No, I'm bringing the whole thing. So Jesus died. Literally, they don't have a book. It's just the things he said. You'd have to throw away the whole religion because he died. It doesn't count anymore. So anyway, that's my argument.
It's just it's important, right? That we have to worry about our own necks, but I am worrying about my own neck. If I'm preaching a false doctrine, that that can be potentially sinful, right? So I need to hash these out with you guys so that the product I'm presenting to the masses is a polished product. It's a cleaned up, coherent doctrine. If I'm preaching incoherent doctrine, that's problematic for my own neck, right? And I'm doing a disservice to submission when I promote a broken ideology, right? And so I'm just not a fan of this. Hey, it's from 1983. Just it's not a big deal. Okay, so what's the cutoff? You know what I mean? What is it? 1985? Is it 1986? Is it 87? Is it 88? Is it when he announced the messengership? You know what I mean? It just gets problematic, and I've run into this problem before. Like I tried to take that route. It doesn't work because get this, the Principles of Contact Prayer was released before Rashad announced that he's a messenger. So if we're only going to accept everything he said after he announced he's a messenger, suddenly we're running into a lot of problems, right? And you could do this for many topics that he brings up in the submitter's perspective that are before May of 88, right? So this concept just doesn't work. The coherent approach that I understood is anything that's a revelation from God, the messenger's teachings, and anything that wasn't refuted in the future, we just take it. That's what it is. We just accept it. It's not based on any dates. I guess if a date you want to draw is when he, actually, no, I wouldn't accept any dates, to be honest with you, because he was a messenger since 1971 anyways. You know what I mean? So the date argument just doesn't work in my understanding.
Yes,
Yeah.
Can I add something to the previous conversation?
Was
Yeah,
there
go ahead,
people
please.
that wanted to speak? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes,
I thought it
yes. I want to see, we're talking about a man seeking a second wife. So as far as adultery, what's the difference, because, an adulterous person usually is a married person that's communicating with another person. So what grounds do you think that, if a man is seeking to talk to another woman would not be an adultery, it would be classified as trying to find a second wife. So, there's dangers in this area.
My understanding is adultery is sexual intercourse. So if you're talking to another woman, it might not be right, but that's not adultery, right?
Can I go now?
Go ahead, Liam. Go ahead. You want who was trying to Liam was trying to talk? Who's trying to talk?
I didn't hear what
Oh,
you say,
go
but
ahead. Go ahead,
yeah,
Liam.
about the translation and explaining. I think translation also serves the function of explaining. People who read the authorized English version, they understand the Quran better. Like people who don't have the light or the guidance, guiding teacher, they study the Quran for decades, and somebody who just started reading the English authorized version, they can just surpass them in months or listen to the messenger. I think the translation serves the function of explaining certain things, but in audios and videos there are still good informations and wisdom that God blessed us with. That's my comment.
Inshallah, I wanted to add a couple of things, inshallah, before I leave. I wanted to head out, but inshallah, may God help us all to benefit and grow our souls and advance, both as individuals and as a community. Yeah, so I wanted to, I think it's easy to have like misunderstandings, miscommunication. Like, I'm not at all saying like throw out, it's really valuable what God taught us through Dr. Khalifa, through his translation, through the practices are also like that's the role of the messengers, that they purify, and when things get corrupted, they clarify, they purify, unify, and this is part of what Dr. Khalifa has done. And we have that, he has purified and clarified the practices. So we continue to follow their path and their teachings. What I was saying was that maybe these are subtle things, and that that verse about going to him to judge among our affairs, that's something that applies. And again, it's best to bring up the verses. We can at another point pull up the verses and talk about it. I think perhaps then it becomes more clear that that's the kind of situation I was referring to specifically in this conversation. But of course, we want to take like what we've learned, that God, we know that God is doing everything. So what God has taught us through Him, and we do salat. I do salat because this is what God tells me in the Quran, and that's proven to be His word. And yes, God blessed Abraham, and it's been passed down through Abraham. However, I'm obeying God at this time, and the Quran. Quran is the, because there's no human messenger among us right now. At the same time, we want to follow the path of all the messengers. We don't want to make a distinction among them. We believe in all of them. God willing, we believe in all of them and follow their path. And so that was one thing I wanted to clarify. And then I think in terms of, of course, we want to be careful not to promote things that are not right. And that's why I think it's wise and healthy to not insist on our understanding. We share, and then we reflect each and ask God for guidance and follow what we think is right. I don't want to insist, like I said, on my understanding. If I've done that, may God forgive me and help me do better. And regarding the problem, so one would need to look at carefully, like when the verses were revealed, when he did what he did, when was it in relation to each other. History is not perfect, and my understanding is that for certain like roles that messengers and prophets have, that's different from others. Like God has commissioned them to do certain things, and obviously He's chosen them, He's commissioned them. They have each their own roles and duties, and God may work through them to do certain things, and that's different from us ordinary people. So in terms of these additional marriages that, it seems like it says, other than, like, this is again from the appendix, other than marrying widowed mothers or 3 political marriages, again, this is something that God may have allowed for Prophet Muhammad because that's what was best for the community of believers and for what God wanted to accomplish at that time. And so I think one would need to kind of look at all those things, consider all those things before making kind of a generalization. Again, just my thoughts and input at the time. Thank God for, and again, if we want to discuss this, I suggest doing this at a time when there's more submitters who've been, kind of when it's a bigger group in the open section discussion, but earlier when more people are around. Thank God for this opportunity. May God bless you all the moderators, everyone who contributed to this. May God bless you all and peace be upon you all.
Peace be upon you, sister.
Peace be upon you.
You know,
Can I say something? Can I just say something really quick on that?
Actually, I'm sorry. There
I
was one other thing I wanted to say in case it's helpful, Brother Naveed. You had mentioned. Thank you for sharing about the situation with the judge and the God willing situation. Something I've thought about that. Of course, we want to follow God's commands, and regarding the God willing, God says, when you say that you're going to do something in the future, that's when you say God willing. And for myself, like, I've realized that sometimes I may, be saying it when it may not be just that situation, which, I'm not saying it's wrong to do that, but the time when God has really, when it's a command that I need to do it is when I'm saying that I'm going to do something. It's good to pull up the verse to make sure that quoting it. So, I don't want to make things harder on myself than they have to be. So it's 18:23 that it says, you shall not say that you will do
18:23 and 4. I'm sorry, 18:23 and 4. Yeah.
Yeah. You shall not say that you will do anything in the future without saying, God willing. If you forget to do this, you must immediately remember your Lord and say, my Lord, guide me to do better next time. So just in case that's helpful, like, I know for myself, this is something I think would be good for me to remember so I don't make things harder on myself than they need to be. May God guide us to what's best. Peace be upon you all.
Please, can we keep our comments short, please? Like, Naveed, you want to go? Can I go after you?
Yeah, sure. I just had a quick short comment. That was an interesting point raised about the timing of the marriage. But the thing is, we know that the first 15, the prophet was married to Khadija solely for a good chunk of his prophethood, right? So that eliminates a lot of that stuff. He was married to Khadija for 25 years, monogamously, right? Am I wrong on that? I think I'm correct, right? So from age 25 to age
Yeah,
50, he only had one wife.
Exactly.
Right? So that means, and so that's how many years into his messengership? At least 10 years into his messengership. So that's going pretty deep in. So that's just one thing to consider. The other thing I wanted to say is that I think that I know a lot of people say, like, look, someone, each of us give our opinion and then we just leave it. And I understand that's an approach. To me, that's not, I mean, anyone's entitled to do whatever approach they want, and I appreciate all suggestions. Personally, that's not my preferred approach because I feel like we don't learn as much when we just talk past each other and we don't actually address each other's points of view. That's why I understand a lot of people think, or some people think that, it's kind of like a cross-examination or like interrogation or whatever. But I think that in general, putting our ideas to the test is very beneficial and helpful. And I just think they need to be directly challenged and addressed rather than just kind of ignored or disregarded. And it's more painful, it's harder, it's uncomfortable, but I think the outcome of that is actually much more beneficial. And we actually address each other's points head on and kind of, get at it a little bit rather than just, okay, I made my point, you made yours, and then we don't really address each other. That's been my experience in submission last 20 something years. But, people have different preferences, I guess. Yeah, that's my comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, can I go? Or was somebody else
Yeah, go
before
ahead.
me?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, this is on off. I wasn't, unfortunately, I missed the study. I want to speak on the topic of, like all these information that we get after Prasad has passed, and what he left us. I believe is a blessing in itself. We are very blessed to have this information, and rather than do guesswork, we have precise information and a ruling based on his videos, audios, writings, everything, right? So in my opinion, it comes down to like, how do you like, as far as I've seen, it comes down to how the majority interpret each. Sometimes it's hard to, like to tell someone that, hey, like maybe you should reread these teachings, and review the video or the audio or everything like that, and that comes with a lot of pain, right? Because people have strong opinions even on these teachings, right? And I have this saying for myself: I have strong opinion, but I hold them loosely. So we have to be more flexible with each other, I believe, and like scrutinize our opinions, like Naveed says, and debate upon these topics, and like present the evidence for what we're talking about, and then not force it on each other, but let the person understand it, like, and the approach is there is no like for each of us, we have a designated time to study this information, to make a choice, right? So we don't need to push it on each other, in my opinion. It's just like debates must happen. It's painful, like Naveed says, and like I'm presented with evidence. These things will be the truth will come on top, no matter what. At the end of the day, that's what matters to us. Is that like what's the ruling about a topic, and if the messenger was alive and made a ruling accordingly, we have to follow. So that's what I think. Thank you.
Hello guys, peace on you. Peace be upon you guys.
Peace be upon you too. I can wait and go after you, brother, if you wanted to say something.
Oh no, I just wanted to say my greetings to you guys.
Oh, okay. God bless you. Yeah, so I just wanted to sorry, I was gonna leave, but I wanted to respond to a couple things, and then inshallah I'll plan to head out. Yeah, so first of all, I'm sorry, I think I could have done better in terms of communicating about the about the questioning, that perhaps so that, because everything needs to be mutually acceptable, so, and we I think it's important to kind of be careful about boundaries and not violating other people's boundaries. So and part of that principle of being like kind and humble among our people and responding in a way that's peaceful. So we need to kind of take all the verses into account in what we're applying in our lives. And these are first reminders for me. May God help me, help us all with all of this. So perhaps it could be like if there are, for having a discussion, if somebody brings up a point, one can bring up questions or additional points and just address it to the group, and then whoever wants to respond can respond. That's my suggestion and idea. And then regarding the audios and videos, I wanted to add that 2 points. One is that we want to take, there may have been a context, like a question and something specific is being addressed by Dr. Khalifa and answering that specific question, but it may not give the whole, like he may not be addressing the whole topic and covering the whole topic in that particular audio or video. Just like when we look at the Quran, there might be a verse that says something on the topic, but really to understand the whole topic, God tells us to read the Quran from cover to cover. So we need to take everything in light of the Quran, like that's our source of guidance, that's our source of law, that's what's complete and fully detailed. And so everything, and this is the example that Dr. Khalifa set for us, that when he was asked questions, he referred to the Quran. And so if we want to follow his example, that's something that we would do, is refer back to the verses of the Quran. And thank God he has explained a lot of things for us and we can use that. At the same time, I think we need to be careful when we are referring to audios and videos, that to have all of this in mind, and that we need to take, any information, like it needs to be in the light of the Quran and the whole Quran. And that, the Quran is the source of law. Like if we were to say that you need all these other things, then that would mean that the Quran itself is not complete. If we were to say, oh, you have to read the Quran, but you also have to listen to all the videos, all the audios, read all the submitters' perspectives and follow all of these, then it means that the Quran is not complete. But we know that God who guides, he's a teacher of the Quran, and the Quran is complete. These other things, they're blessings, like it was mentioned. And some of these things were mentioned earlier by other submitters, but I'm just kind of responding and just wrapping things up. That we need to follow that it is the additional information, they're blessings. At the same time, it's God's word that is the law and the source of the guidance. Thank you all. Peace be upon you all. May God bless you all.
Thank you for the beautiful words. Really well put together, sister. Peace be upon you.
God bless you, brother. Peace be upon you too. Thank you for your kindness.
Oh, wait. Miss Fari, did you say the messenger's teaching?
Miss Fari went a bit too quick there, man.
Okay, well, that's troublesome. That's okay. Anyways, did anyone else have anything to contribute? I just FYI, I don't actually agree with the concept that the messenger's teachings were outside the Quran. I mean, for example, the God said no gambling, right? Gambling is forbidden. The 7th century Arabia did not have this concept of insurance. And we have Rashad explaining 50, 60, 70 times insurance is gambling, right? So, I mean, are you going to say that when he informs us that God perceives insurance as under the umbrella of gambling, is this outside the Quran? I disagree, but that's my take on that. And did anyone else have anything else they'd like to talk about?
Well, just more on that topic. I just think that I hear these arguments all the time, and I think if I never mentioned Dr. Khalifa's anything he ever said, and I just said Quran verses, that's it. I just use his Quran translation. I never said that. They would be completely happy. That side, when I say they, that the ones who take that position, they'd be completely happy. And I would never mention, by the way, that we can never touch our kids. We should never hit our kids. Because you know what? Because that is never said in the Quran. You'd never get that bit of information. You would never get the information that what the Quran is saying is that there is no fight that unless you are fighting for God, for God's word. There's no fighting. You can't fight for land. If you didn't listen to the audios, you wouldn't know that. And if I never mentioned that, let's see, you could come to that conclusion. Let's see, for 1400 years, Muslims didn't come to that conclusion. They came, that Islam is known as a religion of violence, in spite of everybody saying Islam is a religion of peace, because they had the Quran for 1400 years. Yeah, they polluted it with hadith, but they didn't come to that conclusion. But we do have a Appendix 36 that are explaining Quranic concepts once and for all. Quranic concepts that are elucidated in the appendices and explained thoroughly in audios and videos that have been misunderstood for 1400 years, that by the grace of God, it's been clarified for us. And for this marginalization and this idea that, these are all taken, yes, things can be taken out of context. So can the Quran. However, this is information to be looked at, to be examined, and to think that 30 some years after Messenger, we have a whole body of submitters that have ignored this information and that isn't addressing it and saying, well, it's just safer not to look at it, or, well, we really don't know. Why can't we look at it? I mean, look at it. Examine this stuff. This is a messenger of God. Yes, he's a human being, but that means that they sent information from God. And we want to just be safe and okay with oh, no, they're just going to stuff that over there. Look, I got the Quran. That's good enough for me. You know what? That is literally what one of the Dr. Khalifa's messages was saying, that the disbelievers, they say that's okay. We got the Quran. We don't need anything else. And he literally goes on to say that unless you have a guiding teacher, you're not going to make it. And literally, Dr. Khalifa is the guiding teacher. And what's really amazing is that today you hear people saying, well, that was while he was alive. Oh, wait, okay, so he's giving these instructions 2 months before he dies, 3 months before he dies, and this is God giving us that information, but it was only valid for those 3 months. This is just ridiculous. The whole thing to me is like, well, if that's what you think, go ahead and restrict yourself to that. But I don't know if that's going to keep you safe by doing that. That's the thing. I think people do it from the perspective that, look, it's safer. That's more Quran alone. It's more Quran alone to ignore what the messenger said than it is to say Quran alone means you're following what the messenger said. So I see the problem. I'm not ignoring that. Look, it's kind of there's a kind of a struggle there. I acknowledge that. But to say, look, established submitters have already come to the conclusion on this, and we have an understanding, and this is the correct understanding. I reject that. That's what I would say. So may God guide us, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Jeff. I do agree with you on many of the things you did say. I do believe that the messenger, in accordance with Surah 4, verse 115, they point out the guidance, right? For example, I did not need Rashad to tell me. I love this example because this one does not even pertain to me. I always felt, even when I was like 12 years old, I always felt that insurance was like gambling. You're putting money on and hoping that it's just in case something bad happens and you end up saving money in the end, right? And then I come here and Dr. Shah has the same opinion that insurance is gambling, right? But the problem is you don't find insurance, the word, in the Quran, right? Rashad does explain it, and some people disagree, right? And then the question is it okay to disagree? Am I doing something wrong by rejecting his interpretation of what gambling means, right? And the thing is, if there was not something I could listen to prove that he had said it, right, then it would be fine. It's like, hey, it's not clear in the Quran, and God did not leave evidence that he explained it in any fashion. Then yeah, I think you could get away with it. The problem is that that's not the case, right? We have videographic evidence. almost protected at this point. I don't know. I don't even know how these tapes still exist 40 years later. But we have evidence of what the messenger of God explained regarding this work, right? And if you did not hear it, okay. I think you can't be blamed for what you do not know, right? But then if you do hear it, is it a test from God? Are you supposed to reject it? Are you supposed to accept it? That's what it comes down to, right? Personally, I don't believe you can be misled by the messenger, but if you believe that's the trick, that's the test, don't be misled by the messenger, I'm probably failing this test.
Exactly, me as well, and that was what it comes down to. But look, you're placed down there to try to delineate which things the messenger said were Quranic and which weren't. You have the Quran, so you should be able to tell. And that.
But again, Mr. Jeff, that's where the problem lies. Like, I don't see it Quranic, you know, and then there's like, oh, okay, you don't see it Quranic. You just don't see insurance as gambling. You don't see it. I mean, we have plenty of submitters that see it, even without Rashad's involvement, but you don't see it. And this is, again, I have no clue. What happens when the messenger has pointed the guidance out to you and you refuse? What does verse 4, Surah 4, verse 114 say exactly? Let me see. Is it there? Let me put it in the chat. For him who opposes the messenger, after the guidance has been pointed out to him, and follows other than the believer's way, we will direct him in the direction he has chosen and commit him to hell. What a miserable destiny. Yeah, see, this is my issue, right? I feel like if he points to this word, says this word includes insurance, I don't have a choice. He's pointed out the guidance, right? I don't know. I don't want to go to hell, guys. I really don't. If anyone can provide some comfort, please.
You know, mashallah. And you know, the thing I would say furthermore is that, you know, if there's a tide in the submitter community of let's marginalize these things, let's marginalize what his audio or his video, let's marginalize it. Then I look at these verses of putting out the light of God, you know, these kinds of things. I think to myself, wow, how would that not be putting out the light of God? If God sends a messenger to clarify these things, explain some of the things, and then I say, well, he didn't clarify it well enough. It's kind of vague to me, and I didn't understand it. So, you know, it's better, you know, we got the Quran. Let's just go to the Quran. You see what I'm saying? It's like, well, how is that not putting out the light of God? And so I think to myself, why does this seem like a safer position? A safer position to look, just ignore the stuff. Look, it's nice and everything, but look, let's just stick with the Quran. Let's have Quran studies, talk about Quran verses, and not talk about the messenger's input on this, because, you know, we're just not qualified to know what he said. What? He's telling you what the Quran is saying, what God is saying, and you know, it just doesn't make sense to me.
The game of the extremes, and you know who is the master of extremes, right? You either side with the one extreme or the other. So there is no middle ground for this kind of thing, right?
Peace, guys. Can I just make a quick comment about insurance, right? That concept did not really exist in 7th century Arabia, so it's a new development, right? So how would the Quran inform us, like, if insurance is haram or not, right? So like the way is to tell us the general principle that gambling is haram, right? And so so when a new development comes like insurance, what we have to do is, okay, is this gambling or not? Right? The modern concept of insurance is gambling. Now, it could be different. Like, let's say we all decide to put our money into a bank account as like a rainy day fund, right? We can call it insurance, but that specific thing is not gambling. But like the modern idea of what insurance is, that is gambling. And look, it's not just us that say it. Quranists say it, not all of them, but like Sunnis say it. I believe that before I was a submitter, right? So it's not completely like like it's not really controversial. Like even a lot of people who are completely secular see insurance as a form of gambling. And I could post a video in VC1 chat, God willing, that explains why it is gambling. And it's by a guy who's like completely secular, by the way. Like he's not even like talking about religion at all.
Brother, it's completely non-productive part of society. It provides nothing in terms of assets. All it does is it gives people fear. I mean, when somebody's house burns down, if the homeowner rebuilds it or not, it's the same amount of money. I mean, if the homeowner rebuilds it or if the insurance company rebuilds it, it's the same amount of money being pumped into the economy. But the fear that they make so much money on fear that produces nothing. Fear is just fear. Look, y'all, they're providing a service. They're alleviating me of fear, but fear is nothing. It's from Satan. And so it's literally non-productive.
So one question I would have is if we were like to pool our money, just in case, anybody in the future needs it, what what do you think about that, Jeff? Like, do you think that is problematic?
Oh, wow. Huh. Well, I don't think we're supposed to sit on the money just in case. Interesting, though. If a mosque has a fund for just in case, wow. Does that constitute insurance? I don't know. I see your point, though.
Like the point I'm making is that act is not gambling. Like a lot of we all have. Well, I don't know about all of us, but like a lot of people with jobs, stable jobs, have a savings account, right? And they have a thing called a rainy day fund, right? Like I don't view that as the same thing as insurance, because with insurance you're putting in money and you might get a return in it or you might not. But if you're just saving money, there's no increase or loss of it. It's just there,
Oh, I see your point. Yeah, that's just amassing wealth, right? That's amassing wealth. And we're capable. And a rich believer is better than a poor believer, right? So a rich believer means that all that means is that they've amassed capability. So a community that has funds for stuff like that, it's just they have more capability. And so, yeah, I see your point. Yeah. So no, I guess it's not, right? So the issue with the gambling aspect is that they're promising you that they're going to pay for it, and you're saying they're saying, look, it's not gonna. Wait, you're betting it's going to happen. They're betting it's not going to happen, and you just can't get beyond that. That's just the bottom line.
So one other question I have is the Quran does prohibit hoarding, but when does it become hoarding? Like, are you allowed to, how much are you allowed to say? Like, do you kind of get what I'm saying? Like, and it's not just for you, Jeff, it's for anybody who wants to speak. I was just wondering because in the modern, I'm not talking about myself currently because I'm not in a financially good situation. I'm still a student, but in the future, God willing, when people do make enough income, how much are they allowed to save?
I actually always wondered about this too. Couldn't I be hoarding a lot of money and just destabilize the economy in this fashion? I was, super rich. I mean, we actually see it today. People hoarding so much money and they've already paid the income tax and they're just ruining the stability of the dollar or whatever currency they're hoarding. Is there no way to get around that?
That's interesting because you can be worth a lot, but yet you're reinvested back, which is paying for other people's, you're providing opportunity for other people. So the reinvestment, it's not necessarily liquid assets, which you could say in some ways that you're worth a lot, but you don't have a lot. You know what I mean? And you may be giving a lot away, and your reinvesting is helping a lot of people, providing jobs. So it's interesting, that whole dynamic. I don't have an answer, but I'm just looking at it from that way.
Oh, actually, that's a very good thought. So it's more about like doing stuff and not just like keeping like gold, like, I'm just like talking in ancient terms, but like gold and silver in your home, but like reinvesting it or putting it into active use, right?
Exactly. That's, being productive with your assets. I think that's the spirit of it. God blesses you to have success in your company, and then you reinvest, you grow the company, this kind of thing, and now it has more capability. You are, on paper, you're really wealthy, but you might not actually have a lot of liquid assets, and perhaps whatever liquid assets you give away, you give a high percentage of charity away, but yet your money's reinvested in companies. That's the way I see it. That's what to do with your wealth, I think.
So I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's very good thought. Like it might be required as submitters to, like, especially if you have money to invest it or to like do something with it and not to just have a savings account. But like, how does that fit into like retirement funds and all that stuff, Because that's like like I'm thinking way ahead. Like it's not for me personally, but like I know there's older people here who probably have like stable jobs and stuff, but when does a retirement account become hoarding, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. At what point are you saying, look, I don't need to, or I don't need to take a risk here, or I don't have to trust in God. I've got my retirement account. I see your point. Huh? You're right. I haven't thought that one through. I don't know. Retirement account. Yeah.
And like, and sorry to bring these concepts up, but like they're real concepts and they're not really talked about here, but like they're in the real world. But like, how about like pensions? Like you're forced to pay into them like by Social Security, but can you accept them in the future, or are you not supposed to,
So there is one verse that may get around this. They ask you about the toxins and gambling, say in them there's gross sin and some benefits for the people, but their sinfulness far outweighs their benefits. They also ask you what to give to charity, say the excess. God thus clarifies the revelations for you that you may reflect. So the excess, when you start getting to the point where you just have way too much money, right? You can't really justify that this is not excess anymore, right? At that point, I feel like you're pretty much commanded by God. Hey, give some of this away. That's how I read it. That's how I see it, at least. Yeah, but I think saving. I think God does tell us to not give too much or too little. Do not leave ourselves. Was it? What was a verse? Like, do not throw ourselves into destruction. I don't think that's limited to just killing ourselves. I think that's limited to also like putting ourselves in a bad spot, right? Does any of that make sense, Mr. Jeff, Mr. McLincoln?
Oh, my mic's on already. Oh, I'm sorry. I must be making a racket. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with that. I just lost my train of thought. Go ahead, McLincoln.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. McLincoln.
No, I mean it makes so like it all makes sense, but like it's more about how to navigate the modern world, right? Because okay, so we're not supposed to make financial decisions that send us in ruin, because if we do that, it's our own fault. Okay, that's great. But then on the other side, well, we're not supposed to hoard, but like at what point is it hoarding, and when are we being irresponsible with our finances, right? So like it's about finding the right balance, but the it's not about what the Quran says, it's about how do we apply it to our lives, you know? Like at
Yeah,
what
no,
point is it, you know?
I understand. I think if you're following the Quran appropriately, like you would see, you would know. How do you say? It would be apparent to you. I think. You know what? I know I wanted to share this with you guys. And it's not completely relevant, but it also might be sort of relevant. Uh, so a couple days ago, I had a new sweater. I lost it after wearing it one time, right? And you know, I wanted to find it, so I went back to where I may have lost it, right? And they couldn't find it. And I was bummed a bit, but you know, I told myself, look, I lost it. That means God wants it, wanted me to lose it. It's probably somewhere where it was needed, right? And I traveled back home, right? This is in the course of like 30 minutes, right? 30 minutes, an hour. I'm bummed. I'm slightly bummed, but I've already cheered myself up. I told myself God probably gave it to someone who needed it more, right? And then as I was leaving the subway to get back on my street, this very cheerful homeless man was selling this hoodie. Is almost is not my hoodie. It's not my sweater that I lost, but it's exactly the same type and size that the same form that I had lost, right? And he was selling it for $3. Looked brand new. This thing looked like $30-$40 to me. Right? He's selling it for $3, and I passed him by. And I gave him like a kind look, and when I looked back to smile, I took a second look at what he was selling. He was only selling this one item, and he stopped me, and I asked him, "Is this yours?" And to sell. And he's like, "No, man, it's yours, right? For $3." I looked at that. I was like, "Oh my God!" I did not go with the jacket because I had called the store ahead of time. They said my jacket's there. When I went there, it was not my jacket, so I did not take it. Right. So I was no jacket. It was cold in New York, and I was going home jacketless. And God sends me a jacket, a very nice looking jacket for $3. Right. And I almost passed it by. I did not even think that it was from God. Right. And I took this as a sign from God. I gave the guy $5 because I had $5 in my wallet. I gave it to him, and I took the jacket. I was very cheerful, but when I needed it, God gave it to me, and it was apparent. Right. For me, this was God showing me that everything is in His hands, and that when I need, He provides. Right. So if you want to know when do you have so much money, you need to start giving it away. It's going to be apparent if you're following the Quran. He's going to give you opportunities to give some money away. This is how I truly believe what will happen. Right. I don't hear people like, oh, I just saved so much money, I don't know how to spend it. These kinds of stories, they're rare, right? Usually when you have so much money, God gives you places to use it, right? This is from my experience, at least. I don't know if anyone else has had a similar experience. Yeah, but that's my piece.
There's an interesting verse in the Quran where the disbelievers ask, how come God doesn't speak to us? And then God's response is, what are you talking about? He speaks to the believers all the time, It's in chapter 2 somewhere. I just don't remember where it is, but yeah, so I think those experiences are God speaking to us,
I wish we had that verse.
Let me try to find a good one.
Anyways, I think this Quran study is officially over. I'm gonna close the recording, if that's all right. Anyone else want to have any closing statements for the recording before I shut off the recording? No? All right. Stop recording now. All right, there we go. How long is this video?